The termination notice hit Ethan Cole's hands at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, delivered by the coldest billionaire in Manhattan. Vivian Hart didn't blink as she spoke the words that would destroy him. "You're fired." No severance, no explanation, just those two words and the 60-story drop behind her glass desk. Ethan had exactly $43 in his checking account, a 6-year-old daughter waiting for dinner, and rent due in 9 days. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that this wasn't a termination at all. It was a test. And his answer would change everything. If you want to see how far a father's love can reach and how one moment of dignity can shatter a billionaire's world, stay with me until the end. And please, comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The elevator to the 60th floor moved with the kind of silence that only extreme wealth could buy. Ethan Cole watched the numbers climb, each illuminated digit marking another floor between him and the ground, another foot higher into a world he'd never truly inhabit, no matter how many hours he worked in its kitchens. His reflection in the polished steel doors showed a man who looked older than 32. Tired eyes, shoulders that carried invisible weight, hands scrubbed raw from endless shifts over restaurant sinks. The summons had come during the breakfast rush. Margot from HR, her voice tight with something that might have been pity, had pulled him aside between orders of Eggs Benedict and French press coffee. "Ms. Hart wants to see you. Now, 60th floor." Everyone in the kitchen had gone quiet. Summons to the executive level weren't normal. Summons to Vivian Hart's office were apocalyptic. The elevator chimed. The doors whispered open onto a reception area that cost more than Ethan would earn in 5 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a conquest, the city spreading below in a grid of ambition and desperation. The receptionist, immaculate, blonde, wearing pearls that probably had names, gestured toward a set of frosted glass doors without looking up from her screen. "She's expecting you." Ethan's palms were sweating. He wiped them on his work pants, the black polyester blend that marked him as kitchen staff, as someone who belonged 40 floors below serving people who would never learn his name. He'd worn his good shirt today, the one without any permanent stains, but it didn't matter. In this space, he was visibly, undeniably other. He pushed through the doors. Vivian Hart's office was a study in controlled power. Minimalist furniture in shades of white and steel, art on the walls that Ethan suspected was famous but couldn't name, and behind a desk of black marble and chrome, Vivian herself. She didn't look up when he entered, didn't acknowledge his presence at all, just continued reading something on her tablet, one perfectly manicured finger scrolling through what might have been financial reports or the fates of people like him. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that probably had a French name. Her suit was the color of midnight and fit like it had been made on her body. Diamond earrings caught the light with each microscopic movement of her head. Ethan had seen her before, of course. Everyone who worked in the Hart Tower had seen Vivian Hart. She made occasional sweeps through the building's various domains like a general inspecting troops, her presence causing ripples of tension wherever she went. But Ethan had never been this close, had never been alone with her, had never stood in her direct line of potential judgment. He waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The silence stretched like pulled wire, and Ethan understood this was intentional, a power play, a reminder of exactly where he stood in the hierarchy of her world. Finally, she set down the tablet. Her eyes lifted to his face, and Ethan felt the full force of her attention like a physical thing. Her gaze was the color of winter seas, sharp and assessing, the eyes of someone who'd learned to calculate the value of everything and everyone in an instant. "Ethan Cole." She said his name like she was testing its weight. 26 months in the restaurant, kitchen prep and utility, never late, never absent, performance reviews consistently adequate. She paused, and something shifted in her expression, something that might have been curiosity or might have been cruelty. "Do you know why you're here?" Ethan's throat was dry. "No, ma'am." "Ma'am." She repeated the word with faint amusement. How refreshingly archaic. She stood, moving to the window, her back to him now. From this angle, she looked like a silhouette cut from steel, straight lines and sharp edges, no softness anywhere. "I've been conducting an experiment, Mr. Cole. A study in human nature, if you will. I've been selecting employees at random from various departments and observing how they respond to pressure, to fear, to the threat of loss. Dread was beginning to coil in Ethan's stomach, cold and heavy. I don't understand. You will. She turned back to face him, and her expression was utterly neutral, impossible to read. Hart Industries is implementing a new efficiency initiative. We're restructuring several departments, eliminating redundancies, streamlining operations. Your position has been identified as non-essential. The words hung in the air between them like a blade. Effective immediately, Vivian continued, her voice perfectly level, perfectly professional. Your employment with Hart Industries is terminated. You're fired. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Ethan's feet. He heard the words, understood their meaning, but his brain couldn't quite process the reality of them. Fired. He was being fired. Just like that, with no warning, no explanation beyond corporate doublespeak about efficiency and restructuring. There must be... He stopped, swallowed, tried again. Is there any way to appeal this decision? I've never had a negative review. The decision is final. Vivian's tone didn't change, didn't soften. If anything, it grew cooler. HR will process your final paycheck. You have until the end of business today to clear out any personal belongings. Security will escort you from the building. $43 in his checking account. Rent due in 9 days. Mia's school supplies still on a payment plan. The electric bill he'd been stretching across 2 months. Ethan felt something crack inside his chest, felt the carefully constructed architecture of his life beginning to crumble. He'd survived so much. Sarah's death, the medical bills that had swallowed their savings, the brutal loneliness of single parenthood, the exhaustion of working doubles to keep Mia fed and housed and safe. He'd survived all of it by holding on, by showing up, by doing the work even when everything in him wanted to break. And now this woman, this billionaire standing in her palace of glass and steel, was taking away the last thing keeping him and his daughter above water. He should beg. He knew he should beg. Should plead for his job, for another chance. Should explain about Mia, about the bills, about the desperation he woke up with every morning and carried through every shift. People did it all the time. He'd seen grown men cry in front of managers, had watched people sacrifice their dignity for a paycheck. But something in Vivian Hart's eyes stopped him. That assessing gaze, that clinical interest, like she was watching him under a microscope, waiting to see what he would do, waiting to see him break. And Ethan realized with sudden crystalline clarity she wanted this, wanted to see him crumble. This wasn't about efficiency or restructuring, this was about power. About reminding people like him exactly how small they were, how easily disposable. This was about feeding whatever cold thing lived inside people who measured their worth in billions while others measured theirs in hours until payday. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Ethan straightened his shoulders, met her gaze directly, even though everything in him was screaming, even though he could feel his future collapsing into chaos and fear. When he spoke, his voice was steady. I understand. Thank you for the opportunity to work here. Something flickered across Vivian's face, surprise maybe, or possibly disappointment, like he'd deviated from a script she'd expected him to follow. That's it? She asked. No protests? No pleading? Would it make a difference? No. Then no point in wasting either of our time. Ethan paused, and for just a moment, he let her see the real cost of what she'd done. Let her see the father behind the worker, the man behind the uniform. But I do have one favor to ask. Vivian raised an eyebrow, the gesture somehow conveying both permission and skepticism. My daughter, Ethan said quietly. She's 6. She thinks I'm important, thinks the work I do matters. She's proud that her dad works in a fancy building downtown. His voice caught, just slightly, and he had to breathe through it. When I pick her up from school today, she's going to ask me about my day. She always asks. And I'm going to have to figure out how to tell her that her dad lost his job, that we might lose our apartment, that I failed to keep us safe. The silence stretched. Vivian's expression was unreadable. So here's my favor, Ethan continued. When she asked me tonight what happened, could I tell her that I'm still trying? That I'm still looking, still fighting, still doing everything I can? Instead of the truth, which is that someone decided I was non-essential and threw me away before I even knew I was being evaluated. He didn't wait for an answer, didn't bow or scrape or thank her again. Just turned and walked toward the door, his spine straight, his hands steady, even though everything inside him was chaos. "Mr. Cole." Vivian's voice stopped him 3 steps from escape. He turned back. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't parse, something complex and layered, something that didn't match the cold calculation from before. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, "It was a test." Ethan blinked. "What?" "The termination. It wasn't real." Vivian moved back to her desk, pressed a button on her phone. "Margot, cancel the termination paperwork for Ethan Cole. He's to return to his regular duties immediately." She released the button and looked at Ethan directly. "I told you I was conducting an experiment. I wanted to see how you would respond to crisis. Whether you would beg, threaten, break down, or maintain your dignity." The words landed like physical blows. Ethan felt them in his chest, in his throat, in the sudden rush of blood to his face that was part relief and part something much darker. "You—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't find words adequate to the magnitude of what she'd just revealed. "I test people," Vivian said simply. "Character reveals itself under pressure. How someone responds when they believe they've lost everything. That tells me who they really are. And you, Mr. Cole, passed." "Passed." Ethan repeated the word flatly. The relief was draining away, leaving something else in its wake, something that felt like anger, like violation, like a dignity that had been tested and found worthy, but only at the cost of genuine suffering. "You put me through that, made me believe I'd lost my job, made me think about how I'd tell my daughter we might be homeless. As a test?" "Yes." "That's—" He stopped, breathed, tried to find the right words. "That's cruel. That's genuinely, unnecessarily cruel." Vivian's expression didn't change. "It's business." "No." Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. "Business is performance reviews and merit-based decisions and transparent criteria. What you just did is something else entirely. That's using power to cause pain just because you can. That's playing with people's lives like they're game pieces." For the first time since he'd entered the office, Vivian looked uncertain, like she'd expected gratitude for giving him his job back, expected relief to override any other response. Instead, she was facing a man who looked at her like she'd revealed something fundamental and disturbing about herself. "I gave you your job back," she said, and there was a defensive edge to it now. "You shouldn't have taken it away in the first place, not like that, not as some sadistic experiment in human behavior." Ethan moved toward the door again. "I need to get back to work, since apparently I still have a job to get back to." "Mr. Cole?" "No." He turned, met her eyes one final time. "I answered your test. I showed you my character, but you showed me yours too, and I think we both learned something today." He walked out. In her office, Vivian Hart stood very still for a long time after Ethan Cole left. The silence felt different now. Not powerful, but hollow. Empty in a way it hadn't been before. She'd conducted this test 7 times in the past month. 7 employees selected at random from different departments, all subjected to the same scenario. A fake termination, followed by observation of their response. 3 had cried. 2 had begged, offering anything from extended hours to personal favors. 1 had threatened legal action. 1 had simply walked out without a word, fury radiating from every line of her body. And then Ethan Cole, who'd done none of those things, who'd maintained his dignity and then, in the face of what he believed was catastrophic loss, had asked only for permission to protect his daughter from knowing his failure, had asked for the kindness of a comforting lie, not for himself, but for a 6-year-old girl who still believed her father was someone important. "She thinks I'm important, thinks the work I do matters." The words echoed in Vivian's mind, uncomfortable in their simplicity, in their raw honesty. When was the last time anyone had thought she was important beyond her money, beyond her power? When was the last time anyone had looked at her and seen something worth being proud of? And his final words, delivered without anger but with something worse, disappointment. Like he'd expected better from her, had believed she might be someone better, and she'd proven him catastrophically wrong. You showed me yours too. Vivian moved to the window, looked out at the city she'd conquered through ruthlessness and strategy and an absolute unwillingness to let sentiment interfere with success. She'd built an empire on cold calculation, on making hard choices, on never letting emotion cloud her judgment. That's what it took to survive in this world, to thrive, to rise from nothing and claim everything. But standing in her office, her beautiful, expensive, perfectly controlled office, Vivian felt something she hadn't felt in years: shame. She pulled out her phone, opened the HR database, and pulled up Ethan Cole's file. Employee number 7834. Kitchen prep and utility. Hired 26 months ago at minimum wage. Performance reviews. Consistent, reliable, professional. Attendance record, perfect except for 3 instances. She clicked through and found the dates corresponded to a bereavement leave, wife, Sarah Cole, deceased from cancer 2 years prior, and 2 sick days taken with documentation from a pediatrician, patient, Mia Cole, age 6. Vivian scrolled further. Emergency contact, none listed. Next of kin, Mia Cole, daughter. Current address, a Queens apartment in a building Vivian knew from her company's real estate portfolio as borderline condemnable, kept running by a landlord who'd learned to extract maximum profit from minimum investment. There was a photo attached to the file, the standard employee headshot, taken on day 1 of orientation. Ethan looked younger in it, less worn down, though even then there were shadows under his eyes. But it was his expression that caught Vivian's attention, hopeful. Like this job, this minimum wage position in a basement kitchen represented possibility. Like he was grateful for the chance. She thought about what he'd said, about his daughter thinking he was important, about working in a fancy building downtown, about the pride in a 6-year-old's voice when she talked about her father. And Vivian thought about her own father, dead now for 15 years, who'd built his fortune on the backs of workers he'd never learned the names of, who taught her that sentiment was weakness, that power meant never apologizing, never doubting, never looking back at the casualties left in the wake of ambition, who told her the night before she took over Hart Industries that the only thing that mattered was winning. She'd believed him, had built her entire life on that foundation. Now standing alone in her office with its million-dollar view, Vivian wondered what it had cost her, what she'd become in the pursuit of being exactly what her father had trained her to be. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Board meeting in 20 minutes. Quarterly reports ready for your review. Business, always business. The empire didn't run itself, didn't allow for doubt or introspection or inconvenient questions about character and cruelty. But even as Vivian gathered her materials and prepared to step back into the role she'd perfected, the Ice Queen, the ruthless executive, the woman who made hard choices without flinching, she couldn't shake the image of Ethan Cole's face. The dignity in his posture even as his world collapsed. The love in his voice when he spoke about his daughter. The disappointment when he looked at Vivian and saw exactly who she was. You showed me yours too. She pulled up the security footage from the hallway outside her office, watched Ethan's exit on the small screen. He'd walked steadily to the elevator, pressed the button, waited. When the doors opened, he'd stepped inside, and only then, only when he thought no one could see, had his shoulders sagged. Had he braced one hand against the elevator wall, dropped his head, and stood there shaking for the 5 seconds before the doors closed and carried him back down to the world where people like him belonged. Vivian watched it 3 times. Then she closed the feed and headed to her meeting. But something had shifted. Some carefully maintained wall had developed a crack. Ethan made it through the rest of his shift on autopilot. His hands knew the work, the endless cycle of prep and cleaning, the rhythm of restaurant service that continued whether anyone's world was falling apart or not. His coworkers noticed something was off, but didn't press. They knew better than to ask questions when someone came back from the executive floors. At 3:15, Ethan clocked out and headed for the subway. The train to Queens was packed with the afternoon crowd, people pressed together in tired silence. He found a spot by the doors and let his forehead rest against the cool metal, watching the tunnel walls blur past in the window's reflection. His phone buzzed, a text from Mia's after-school program. Mia is ready for pickup. She made a painting today she's very excited to show you. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. That was the thing about kids. Their joy was portable, unconditional, unconnected to anything happening in the adult world. Mia could be excited about a painting regardless of whether her father had believed he was fired or whether a billionaire had played psychological games with his survival. The painting, when he arrived at the after-school center, turned out to be a portrait. Sort of. Mia's artistic style favored enthusiasm over accuracy, so the result was more abstract than realistic, but Ethan could make out the key elements. A tall figure holding hands with a small figure, both rendered in broad strokes of primary colors. "It's you and me," Mia explained unnecessarily, bouncing on her toes as Ethan crouched down to her level. "And we're going to the park. See the green? That's grass. And the yellow is the sun, but it's smiling because it's a happy sun. It's beautiful, baby." Ethan pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and finger paint and the indefinable smell that was purely Mia. "I love it. We'll put it on the fridge when we get home. Can we go to the park now, since we're already dressed for it?" She gestured at the painting as if it constituted wardrobe selection. Ethan checked his watch. They could spare an hour before dinner needed to happen. Yeah, we can go to the park." Mia's squeal of delight was worth the exhaustion, worth the extra time it would take away from the evening's checklist of laundry and meal prep and paperwork. Worth everything, really. They walked the 4 blocks to the small neighborhood park, Mia chattering the entire way about her day, about Leo who'd shared his crackers at snack time, about the new song they were learning for the winter program, about a butterfly she'd seen that was the biggest butterfly in the whole entire world, Daddy, I promise. At the park, Mia made a beeline for the swings. Ethan pushed her, his arms falling into the familiar rhythm, watching her ponytail fly out behind her with each arc through the air. Her laughter rang across the playground, pure and uncomplicated, the sound of someone who still believed the world was fundamentally good. "Higher," she called. "Push me higher." "Any higher and you'll go into orbit," Ethan teased, but he pushed harder anyway, watched her swing up toward the graying afternoon sky. "Daddy?" Mia's voice came between pumps of her legs. "Are you sad?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you think I'm sad?" "Your face looks sad, like when you're thinking about Mommy." Ethan's chest tightened. Mia rarely mentioned Sarah directly. It had been 2 years since the cancer took her. 2 years since Mia had been old enough to understand that Mommy wasn't coming back, but young enough that the memories were already starting to blur. Sometimes Ethan didn't know if that was a mercy or a tragedy. "I'm not sad," he said, and it was mostly true. Whatever he felt about Vivian Hart's test, about the cruelty of it, wasn't sadness. It was something more complicated. Anger, yes, but also a strange kind of clarity. Just thinking about work stuff, adult boring things. "Is your work okay?" Mia's swing was slowing now as she dragged her feet. "Are you still important?" "Still important," Ethan confirmed, his throat tight. "Still working in the fancy building." Mia nodded, satisfied, and launched herself off the swing in a move that aged Ethan 10 years. She landed clean, though, and immediately ran toward the slide, her moment of concern already forgotten in favor of the next adventure. Ethan sank onto a bench, watching her play. Around them, other parents were scattered across the park. Mothers mostly, a few fathers, all wearing the same expression of tired vigilance that came with shepherding small humans through public spaces. He didn't recognize any of them, didn't know their names, but there was a kinship in it anyway. The universal brotherhood of people trying their best with limited resources and infinite love. His phone buzzed again, this time an email notification. From hr@heartindustries.com. Subject, schedule update. Ethan's stomach dropped. He opened it expecting what? Some aftermath of Vivian's test? Official documentation of what had happened? Instead, he found a standard schedule notification. His shifts for next week, unchanged from the usual rotation. Nothing indicating that anything unusual had occurred, like the whole morning had been a bizarre fever dream, a glitch in reality that left no official trace. But it had happened. Ethan had the memory of it burned into his mind. Vivian's cold expression, the word fired, the free-fall sensation of losing everything, and then the revelation that it had all been theater, a performance designed to measure his breaking point. He thought about going higher up the chain, filing a complaint with HR about unethical management practices, maybe even talking to a lawyer, though he had no money for that and wouldn't know where to start. But what would he say? That his boss had pretended to fire him as a psychological experiment? That she'd caused him genuine distress and then revealed it was all a test? Could you file a complaint for emotional manipulation when no actual employment action had been taken? And even if you could, what would happen? Vivian Hart owned the company, owned the building, owned the employment of everyone in it. People like her didn't face consequences for people like him. That was just reality, as fixed and immutable as gravity. "Daddy, watch this!" Mia was hanging upside down from the monkey bars, her face red with the rush of blood and the thrill of being inverted. "I'm a bat!" "Very impressive bat," Ethan called back, forcing his attention away from his phone, away from the afternoon's psychic damage, back to what mattered. "But bats eventually have to go home for dinner. Think you can unbat yourself in about 5 minutes?" Mia considered this with the seriousness it deserved. 10 minutes. 7. "Deal." "What?" They walked home as the streetlights began to flicker on, Mia carrying a stick she'd found and declared to be a magic wand that grants wishes but only for good things. She waved it at passing cars, at pigeons, at a bodega cat sleeping in a window. "What are you wishing for?" Ethan asked. "It's secret," Mia said firmly. "If you tell wishes, they don't come true. That's the rules." Can't argue with the rules. Their building rose ahead of them, 6 stories of aging brick and sagging fire escapes. Home. It wasn't much, a 1-bedroom where Mia got the bedroom and Ethan made do with the pull-out couch where the heat was unreliable and the hot water lasted approximately 7 minutes, where sounds from neighboring apartments bled through walls so thin they might as well be suggestions. But it was theirs. Ethan had signed the lease with Sarah, back when things were different, when they'd believed this was just temporary. A stepping stone to something better. That belief had died with her, but the apartment remained, the last place Sarah had lived, where her coffee mug still sat in the cabinet and her handwriting still marked the calendar hanging in the kitchen. Ethan unlocked the 3 separate locks on their door, courtesy of a neighborhood that didn't always respect the sanctity of other people's possessions, and ushered Mia inside. She immediately ran to the refrigerator to position her new painting in the place of honor, displacing last week's masterpiece, a rainbow made with handprints. "Can we have mac and cheese for dinner?" she asked hopefully. "We can have mac and cheese for dinner," Ethan confirmed. It was cheap, it was fast, and Mia would actually eat it without negotiation. Some nights, that was the best you could hope for. While the water boiled, Ethan helped Mia with her homework. Basic addition problems that she attacked with fierce concentration, her tongue poking out the side of her mouth the way Sarah's used to when she was focused on something. The genetic echo made Ethan's heart hurt in the way it always did when he saw his wife's face in their daughter's features. After dinner, after bath time, after the ritual of toothbrushing and pajamas and the 3 stories Mia had negotiated from the original 2, Ethan tucked her into bed and sat on the edge of the mattress. "Daddy?" Mia's voice was already drowsy, her eyes half closed. "Are you happy?" The question surprised him. "Why do you ask?" "Mrs. Peterson said happiness is important, that we should check on people we love to make sure they're happy." Mrs. Peterson, Mia's teacher, was apparently teaching emotional intelligence alongside mathematics. "I'm happy," Ethan said, and he meant it. Not in the simple way Mia meant the word, not the uncomplicated joy of a child who found magic wands and sticks and adventure and playground equipment, but in the deeper way, the more complex way, the way that meant, "I am here with you, and you are safe, and you are loved, and that is enough." "Good," Mia mumbled, her eyes closed fully. "Love you, Daddy." "Love you too, baby. Sweet dreams." He stayed until her breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep, then carefully extracted himself from her room and closed the door to a crack. In the living room, he pulled out the couch bed and stared at the stack of bills on the small table that served as both dining surface and desk. Electric bill, $63. Internet, necessary for job searching and Mia's online homework, $45. Groceries. He'd managed to keep it to $90 this week, but that was with heavy reliance on pasta and frozen vegetables. Mia's after-school program, $200 a month, the cheapest option he'd found, that wasn't actively dangerous. It all added up to barely managing, to a mathematical equation that only balanced if nothing unexpected happened. No emergencies, no sudden expenses, no loss of income, no billionaires playing games with his employment status. Ethan lay back on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, where a water stain shaped like South America had been slowly expanding since they moved in. He thought about Vivian Hart in her office with its million-dollar view, wondered if she'd gone home to some penthouse apartment where the ceilings didn't leak and the neighbors didn't argue at 2 a.m. and the refrigerator didn't make a sound like a dying animal every time it cycled on. Wondered if she'd thought about him at all after he left, or if he'd just been data point number 7 in her experiment, logged and analyzed and ultimately forgotten as she moved on to the next quarter's strategic initiatives. You showed me yours too. He'd meant it. Whatever test she'd been conducting, it had revealed as much about her as it had about him, had shown him exactly the kind of person who rose to the top of the corporate ladder, someone who could cause genuine suffering as casually as ordering coffee, who measured human worth in performance metrics and efficiency ratings. His phone buzzed on the table. This time, a text from an unknown number. "This is Vivian Hart. I wanted to apologize for this morning. It was inappropriate. I'm working on policy changes to ensure it doesn't happen again. VH." Ethan stared at the message for a long moment. An apology. From Vivian Hart. To him. He should probably feel vindicated, or satisfied, or something positive. Instead, he just felt tired. He didn't respond. Just set the phone aside, turned off the light, and tried to sleep. But in the darkness, he kept seeing her face. That moment when his words had landed, when something in her carefully controlled expression had fractured, when she'd looked almost human. Vivian Hart didn't sleep well that night either. She stood in her penthouse apartment, 32nd floor, 3,000 square feet, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Manhattan that had cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, and felt the weight of silence. The apartment was perfect. Designed by an award-winning architect, furnished by a celebrated interior designer, featured in magazines that catered to people who measured square footage in fractions of millions. Everything in it was exactly what it should be, positioned exactly where it belonged, and it was completely, utterly empty. Not of furniture or art or expensive objects, empty of people, empty of life. Empty of the kind of warmth she'd seen in Ethan Cole's face when he talked about his daughter, the kind of purpose that came from mattering to someone beyond your productivity metrics. Vivian poured herself a glass of wine, something rare and expensive that she couldn't actually taste the difference in, and stood at the window. Somewhere out there, in some cramped Queens apartment, Ethan was probably sleeping on a pull-out couch while his daughter dreamed in the only bedroom, making it work on a paycheck that wouldn't cover Vivian's monthly dry cleaning bill. And he'd looked at her with disappointment. Not fear, not hatred, not even anger, just deep, genuine disappointment, like he'd expected better. When was the last time anyone had expected better from her? Her phone sat on the marble countertop, the text message still visible on the screen. "I'm working on policy changes to ensure it doesn't happen again." She'd sent it on impulse, a rare moment of unfiltered response. And now, hours later, there was still no reply. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he was ignoring her. Maybe he deleted the message without reading it. Or maybe he just had nothing to say to her, no interest in her apology or her policy changes or anything else she might offer. Maybe she'd revealed herself too completely, shown him exactly who she was, and he'd made his assessment and moved on. The thought bothered her more than it should have. Vivian set down her wine glass and moved to her home office, a smaller room off the main living space, dominated by a desk that was the twin to the one in her tower office. She opened her laptop and pulled up Ethan's file again. She'd been looking at it on and off all day, in moments between meetings, during the car ride home, trying to understand what it was about this particular man that had gotten under her skin when 6 others hadn't. Maybe it was the daughter. That detail made him different from the other test subjects, gave him something to fight for beyond himself, something that transformed desperation into dignity. Or maybe it was the way he'd spoken to her, not with deference or fear, but with honesty. Like he saw her clearly and wasn't impressed by what he found. She scrolled through his employment records, noting details she'd missed earlier. His start date coincided almost exactly with his wife's death. He'd been hired during the 3-month period when Sarah Cole had been in hospice, when bills would have been catastrophic and stability would have been impossible to find. Hart Industries had been his lifeline. This job, this minimum wage kitchen position, had been what kept his family afloat through the worst period of his life. And today, Vivian had taken it away, just for a moment, just as a test, and watched him face that loss with more grace than she'd shown in any moment of her privileged existence. That's cruel. That's genuinely, unnecessarily cruel. He'd been right. Vivian closed the laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes. Somewhere in the past 15 years of running Hart Industries, of proving herself in boardrooms full of men who thought her father's fortune was wasted on a daughter, of building an empire through ruthlessness and strategy, she'd lost something essential. She'd become exactly what the business world rewarded: cold, calculating, efficient. Someone who could make hard choices without flinching, who never let sentiment interfere with success. Someone who tested people's breaking points as casually as checking the weather. Her phone buzzed. For a brief, irrational moment, Vivian hoped it was Ethan responding. Instead, an email from her assistant. Tomorrow's schedule, packed with back-to-back meetings, strategic calls, decisions that would affect thousands of people she would never meet. The empire demanded its due. It always did. But as Vivian prepared for bed in her enormous apartment with its museum-quality art and its perfect silence, she couldn't shake the memory of Ethan Cole's face. The disappointment in his eyes when he looked at her and saw exactly who she'd become. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian wondered if winning had been worth the cost. The policy change memo landed on department heads' desks 3 days later. It was brief, professional, and unprecedented. Effective immediately, all Hart Industries employees with dependent children under 12 would receive protected scheduling rights. Mandatory advance notice for shift changes. Guaranteed flexibility for school emergencies. No retaliation for childcare-related absences with proper documentation. In the executive break room, where senior managers gathered for overpriced coffee and carefully neutral gossip, the memo generated confused speculation. Since when does Hart care about work-life balance? Marcus Chen from operations held up his copy like it might contain hidden messages. Last quarter, she vetoed the parental leave expansion because it reduced operational efficiency. Jennifer Walsh from legal took a careful sip of her latte. Maybe she's planning to run for office. Politicians love this family-friendly optics stuff. Or she got sued and we don't know about it yet, suggested Derek from finance. Preemptive policy changes to show good faith. None of them landed anywhere close to the truth. That their CEO had spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about a kitchen worker's quiet dignity and a 6-year-old girl who believed her father was important. Vivian heard the speculation. She always heard everything that mattered in her building, but offered no explanation. The memo spoke for itself. Implementation would begin immediately, managed by HR with her direct oversight. What she didn't expect was for the policy to reach Ethan Cole quite so directly, quite so soon. He found out Thursday morning when his supervisor, Danny, pulled him aside during breakfast prep. Danny was a career food service manager, weathered by decades of demanding customers and impossible kitchen timelines. Not the kind of man who went out of his way for anyone. "Got something for you," Danny said gruffly, thrusting a printed email into Ethan's hands. "New scheduling policy. Means you get to pick your daughter up on time without me breathing down your neck about it." Ethan scanned the memo, disbelief slowing his comprehension. Protected scheduling, flexibility for parents, guaranteed rights, not supervisor discretion. "Is this real?" he asked. "Came from the top. HR says it's enforceable, effective immediately." Danny shifted, uncomfortable with anything resembling sentiment. "Means I can't give you grief anymore about leaving at 3:15 on the dot. Policy says so." For 2 years, Ethan had lived in low-grade anxiety about his pickup schedule, had absorbed Danny's pointed comments about commitment and flexibility, had skipped lunch breaks and arrived early to compensate for leaving on time, trying to prove he was worth the accommodation. And now, just like that, it was policy. Protection, not privilege. "Did they say why?" Ethan asked carefully. "Why now?" Danny shrugged. Above my pay grade. Maybe Hart's getting soft in her old age, though I wouldn't bet on it. Ethan folded the memo and slipped it into his pocket, his mind racing. This wasn't random. Policies like this didn't emerge from nowhere, didn't get pushed through bureaucracy and implementation in 3 days without serious executive pressure. Vivian had done this. Had taken his words, his plea to tell Mia he was still trying, still fighting, and turned them into structural change. Not just for him, but for every parent in the building facing the same impossible mathematics of childcare and employment. He should feel grateful. Should feel vindicated, maybe, that his confrontation had generated actual results. Instead, he felt something more complicated. Because this wasn't apology, it was compensation. It was Vivian Hart doing what powerful people did when they felt guilty, throwing resources at the problem instead of examining what had made them cause it in the first place. Still, when Ethan left work that afternoon at precisely 3:15, walking past Danny without explanation or apology, there was a lightness in his step that hadn't been there in months. That same afternoon, Vivian stood in the observation gallery overlooking the Hart Tower restaurant. It was a small room, accessible only to management, designed originally for her father to monitor operations without being seen. Vivian rarely used it. Micromanagement wasn't her style, and watching service staff felt vaguely voyeuristic. But today she stood behind the one-way glass, watching the kitchen operate through the lunch rush, watched Ethan Cole move through his station with practiced efficiency, his hands quick and certain, his focus absolute. He looked different than he had in her office. More himself, somehow. In his element, doing work he understood, surrounded by the controlled chaos of professional cooking. There was competence there, skill that her employment database reduced to adequate performance, but that she could see now was actually mastery of a complex physical and temporal puzzle. "Ms. Hart?" Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 2 o'clock is here." Vivian tore her gaze away from the kitchen. "I'll be right there." But she paused at the door, looked back one more time. Ethan was plating something, she couldn't see exactly what from this angle, with careful attention to presentation, like it mattered that the food looked good, even though most customers would barely notice before consuming it. That was the difference, she realized. Ethan worked like it mattered, not because someone was watching or evaluating, not because there were incentives or recognition, but because doing things properly was its own reason. When was the last time Vivian had approached anything that way? She left the observation room and returned to the world of quarterly earnings and strategic planning, where everything was measured in metrics and nothing was valuable unless it contributed to the bottom line. But the image stayed with her. Ethan's hands, moving with purpose. Work that mattered because he made it matter. The weekend arrived with its usual urban rhythms. Saturday morning found Ethan and Mia at the laundromat, a weekly ritual that Mia had somehow decided was an adventure. She helped sort clothes by color with intense seriousness, treated the industrial washers like spaceships, and made up stories about the other patrons that were almost certainly slanderous. "That lady is a secret superhero," Mia whispered, pointing to an elderly woman folding towels. "She fights crime at night, but during the day she has to wash her cape." "Her cape looks suspiciously like a bathrobe," Ethan observed. "That's her disguise. Obviously." While the washers ran, Ethan pulled out his phone and did something he'd been avoiding all week. He opened the text from Vivian Hart and read it again. "This is Vivian Hart. I wanted to apologize for this morning. It was inappropriate. I'm working on policy changes to ensure it doesn't happen again. VH." He'd meant to delete it. Should have deleted it days ago. But something kept him from pressing the button. Maybe the sheer improbability of it. A billionaire CEO apologizing to kitchen staff. Maybe the fact that she'd actually followed through had actually changed policy. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just the human impulse to hold on to evidence that somewhere beneath the cold exterior, Vivian Hart was capable of recognizing when she'd caused harm. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He could respond now, acknowledge the apology and the policy change. Could say thank you, or accept the gesture, or any number of appropriate responses. Instead, he locked his phone and pocketed it. Some conversations were better left unfinished. "Daddy, the spaceship is done," Mia announced, pointing at the washer that had cycled into its final spin. "We need to rescue the clothes before they get too dizzy." Ethan smiled and followed his daughter to the machines, leaving Vivian Hart's apology unanswered in his pocket. Across town, in her penthouse apartment, Vivian was also thinking about that text, about the silence that had followed it, stretching now into 5 days. She checked her phone more times than she wanted to admit, each time finding the same lack of response. Most people she texted responded within minutes, their replies eager and deferential. But Ethan Cole apparently had no interest in making things easy for her. She should let it go, should accept that she'd apologized and changed policy and done everything reasonable to remediate her mistake. Should move on to the hundreds of other items demanding her attention. But Vivian found herself pulling up building security footage instead. Not her office cameras, she wasn't spying exactly, just the employee entrance feeds, the public areas. She told herself it was routine operational review, spot-checking security protocols. The lie didn't even convince her. She watched Ethan arrive Monday morning at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, as always. Watched him clock in, exchange brief words with the security guard, head toward the service elevators. His posture was different than it had been in her office. Looser, more relaxed. Like the policy change had lifted weight she hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Tuesday morning, a woman met him at the entrance. They spoke for perhaps 90 seconds, the woman gesturing animatedly, while Ethan listened with patient attention. Then she handed him something. Vivian zoomed in, enhanced the image. A casserole dish wrapped in foil. Ethan accepted it with what looked like genuine warmth, said something that made the woman laugh, then headed inside while she walked away. A neighbor, maybe. Or a friend. Someone who brought him food, who cared enough to check on him. Vivian wondered what that was like. Having people who showed up with casseroles, who cared about your life beyond what you could do for them. She closed the security feed and pulled up her calendar instead. Back-to-back meetings until 7 p.m. Dinner with the Investors' Council at 8. Conference calls with the London office starting at 11. This was her life. This was what success looked like. No time for neighbors bearing casseroles. No space for relationships that didn't serve strategic purposes. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant. Board meeting moved up to 2 p.m. Quarterly reports need your review first. Vivian closed her eyes briefly, pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. Then she opened the reports and got back to work. But even as she analyzed profit margins and operational efficiency, part of her mind stayed fixed on a man carrying a casserole dish, heading into a building where he worked for wages that barely kept his daughter fed. A man who'd looked at her with disappointment and then gone silent. Wednesday afternoon, Ethan's carefully balanced world tilted sideways. The call came during the lunch rush, his phone buzzing insistently in his locker. He almost ignored it. Danny's rules about phones during service were absolute, but something made him check. The number belonged to Mia's school. His stomach dropped. He stepped into the hallway, pressed the phone to his ear. "This is Ethan Cole." "Mr. Cole, this is Principal Morrison at PS 84. The woman's voice was professionally calm, which somehow made it worse. "Mia's fine, but we need you to come pick her up. There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" "She's in my office. She's not hurt, but there was an altercation with another student and some concerning statements. I think it's better if we discuss this in person." Ethan's mind raced through worst-case scenarios. "I can be there in 40 minutes. "That's fine. We'll wait." He hung up and stood frozen for 10 seconds, panic and logistics warring in his brain. Then he moved, shoving his phone in his pocket and heading back to the kitchen. Danny looked up from the expo line, his expression already hardening. "Where are you going?" "School called. My daughter. There's an emergency. I have to go." "Middle of lunch rush, Cole. Can it wait 2 hours?" The old Ethan would have absorbed this, would have calculated whether he could negotiate or beg or promise to make it up. The new Ethan, protected by policy that Vivian Hart herself had signed, met Danny's eyes steadily. "New policy says I can go. Childcare emergency with documentation. I'll get paperwork from the school." Danny's jaw worked, but he couldn't argue with corporate policy. "Fine. Go, but you're making this up tomorrow." Ethan was already moving, not bothering to acknowledge the threat. He grabbed his jacket from his locker and ran. The subway ride to Queens lasted forever. Ethan stood pressed against the doors, watching stations blur past, his imagination conjuring increasingly terrible scenarios. Mia hurt, Mia sick, Mia in some kind of trouble that would require resources he didn't have. PS 84 was an aging building that served a neighborhood of people like Ethan, working parents stretching paychecks, immigrants building new lives, families holding on by their fingernails to the promise of something better. The halls smelled like institutional cleaning products and cafeteria food, the walls decorated with student artwork that tried to brighten spaces fundamentally designed for efficiency over aesthetics. Principal Morrison's office was small and cluttered, dominated by a desk covered in paperwork and a bookshelf sagging under the weight of educational theory texts. And sitting in the chair beside the desk, looking very small and very guilty, was Mia. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him, and Ethan caught her automatically, his panic receding slightly at the evidence that she was, in fact, physically intact. "Hey, baby, what happened?" Principal Morrison gestured for Ethan to sit. She was a woman in her 50s, black, with kind eyes, and the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of managing children and their complicated lives. Mia got into a physical altercation with another student today. The other child is fine, no injuries, but several teachers witnessed Mia pushing this student quite forcefully. Ethan looked down at his daughter. "Mia, is this true?" Mia's face crumpled. "He said mean things." "What kind of mean things?" "He said," her voice caught, "he said that kids without moms are broken, that something must be wrong with me because my mom didn't want to stay." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He looked at Principal Morrison, who nodded with weary recognition. "The other student is 7, she said quietly. "Old enough to be cruel, but not old enough to understand the impact. I've spoken to his parents, but Ethan, that's not the main concern." She paused, choosing her words carefully. After the incident, Mia told her teacher that she didn't care about getting in trouble because nothing matters anyway. That's the part that worried us. Ethan pulled Mia closer, felt her shake against his chest. "Baby, is that what you said?" "I was just mad," Mia whispered. "I didn't mean it." Principal Morrison leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, I know you're doing everything you can. I see it. You're here for every parent conference, every pickup, every school event. But Mia's teachers have noticed some changes lately. She's withdrawing more during group activities. Her artwork has gotten darker. Small things, individually, but together they paint a picture of a child carrying stress she doesn't have language to express." The guilt settled over Ethan like a familiar coat. Of course Mia was stressed. How could she not be, living in their cramped apartment, watching her father work himself to exhaustion, growing up in the shadow of a loss she barely remembered but felt in every single parent household around her? "What do you suggest?" he asked, though he already knew what was coming. Therapy, counseling, services that cost money he didn't have, time he couldn't spare. The school counselor can see her once a week, free of charge. And there are some community programs, grief support groups for children, that kind of thing. I can give you information. Principal Morrison slid a folder across her desk. But honestly, Mr. Cole, the most important thing is just making sure she has space to process. Kids this age need to know it's okay to feel sad, to be angry, to miss what they've lost. They need permission to not be okay sometimes. Ethan nodded, though his throat was too tight to speak. Mia had shifted in his lap, her face pressed against his shoulder, her small hands gripping his jacket like she was afraid he might disappear too. "Can I take her home?" he managed. "Of course. She's suspended for the rest of today, standard protocol for physical altercations, but she can return tomorrow." Principal Morrison's expression softened. "You're doing a good job, Ethan. I mean that, but you can't do it alone forever." The words echoed in Ethan's mind as he walked Mia out of the school, her hand small and warm in his. The afternoon stretched ahead of them, unexpected hours together that should have felt like a gift, but instead felt like evidence of failure. They took the subway home in silence. Mia leaned against him, unusually quiet, her earlier defiance drained away. By the time they reached their apartment, her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. "Am I in trouble?" she asked as Ethan unlocked their door. "No, baby, you're not in trouble." He crouched to her level. "What that kid said was mean and wrong. Your mom loved you more than anything in the world. She wanted to stay so badly. She fought so hard to stay. But sometimes bodies don't work the way we want them to, and that's not anybody's fault. Mia's lip trembled. I miss her. I miss her too. Do you think she's watching us? Like from heaven? Ethan hesitated. He'd never been particularly religious, and Sarah had been even less so, but sometimes kids needed comforting stories more than theological accuracy. I think if love could cross any distance, hers would find you, every single day. Mia wrapped her arms around his neck, and Ethan held her while she cried, really cried, in a way she hadn't since the funeral. All the grief she'd been too young to process, too resilient to indulge, finally breaking through and shaking sobs against his shoulder. When the storm passed, Ethan settled her on the couch with her favorite blanket and made hot chocolate. The cheap instant kind that was mostly sugar, but Mia didn't care. She sipped it slowly, her eyes distant. Daddy? Are we poor? The question came from nowhere, landing with devastating precision. Why do you ask? Lucy at school said her family went to Disney World for vacation, and Tyler has a new iPad, and everyone has new backpacks except me. She looked down at her hot chocolate. I don't care about Disney World, but sometimes kids say things about my clothes being old. Ethan's chest ached. He'd tried so hard to shield her from this, to make their life feel normal and full despite its material limitations. But kids noticed everything, measured their worth against impossible standards, absorbed the world's brutal hierarchies without any context to soften them. We have enough, he said carefully. We have a home and food and each other. Some people have more than us and some people have less. But the things that really matter, love, safety, being together, those we have in abundance. Mia nodded, but her expression stayed troubled. Will we always have enough? Yes, Ethan said, with more certainty than he felt. I promise you, baby, we'll always have enough. She seemed to accept this, or at least decided to trust him. She finished her hot chocolate and curled up against his side, and within minutes she was asleep. The deep, boneless sleep of a child who'd burned through all her emotional reserves. Ethan stayed still, afraid to wake her, and stared at the ceiling with its South America-shaped stain. Principal Morrison's words cycled through his mind. You can't do it alone forever, but what choice did he have? There was no family to call on. Sarah's parents had died before Mia was born, and his own had made it clear that his marriage to a woman with cancer was a mistake they wouldn't support. No friends with resources to spare, everyone in his life equally strapped, equally struggling. Just him and Mia and the daily mathematics of survival. His phone buzzed, a text from Danny. Need you tomorrow at 5 a.m., making up the time you missed. Ethan closed his eyes. 5 a.m. meant leaving Mia with Mrs. Chen, their neighbor who watched her in early morning emergencies. Meant paying extra he didn't have budgeted. Meant another debt in the endless ledger of things he owed to people who kept his life functional. He should respond, should confirm, should play the game of grateful employee who understood that flexibility came with costs. Instead, he pulled up a different message thread, the text from Vivian Hart, still sitting unanswered in his phone. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then, before he could second-guess himself, he typed, Your policy change saved me today. My daughter had an emergency at school, and I was able to leave without losing my job. Thank you for that. He hit send before his better judgment could intervene. The response came faster than he expected, almost like she'd been waiting. I'm glad it helped. Is your daughter okay? Ethan stared at the question. It was probably just politeness, the kind of pro forma concern that people offered without expecting detailed answers. But something in him, the exhaustion, the emotion of the afternoon, the weight of carrying everything alone, made him answer honestly. She pushed another kid who said cruel things about her dead mother, then told her teacher that nothing matters anyway. So no, not really okay. But we're managing. The 3 dots indicating typing disappeared, appeared again. Finally, that sounds incredibly difficult. I'm sorry you're dealing with that. Part of being a parent, Ethan typed back. The hard stuff doesn't stop just because you'd rather it did. Another pause. Then, for what it's worth, your daughter is lucky to have you. Ethan laughed, the sound bitter in the quiet apartment. She'd probably disagree right now. I can't afford therapy or Disney World or new backpacks. I can barely afford to keep the lights on. He regretted the message the moment he sent it. Too honest, too raw, too much information for someone who was essentially his boss's boss's boss. But it was too late to unsend, so he just sat there with his sleeping daughter on his chest and waited to see if he'd just committed professional suicide by oversharing. The response, when it came, wasn't what he expected. "Would you have dinner with me? Tomorrow night, I'd like to talk." Ethan read the message 3 times, trying to parse its meaning. Was this a professional dinner? A pity invitation? Some extension of her ongoing experiment in human behavior? "Why?" he typed. "Because I think we should talk. About things that matter. Off the clock, off the record. Just 2 people having a conversation." Mia stirred against him, mumbling something in her sleep about butterflies and magic wands. Ethan looked down at her peaceful face, then back at his phone. Every instinct told him to decline, to maintain professional distance, to avoid whatever complicated territory this invitation represented. Vivian Hart was dangerous, not in a physical way, but in the way that powerful people were always dangerous to those without power. She could ruin his life with a word, could help it with equal ease, and neither option was comfortable. But she'd changed policy because of him, had apologized, had followed through, had just asked if his daughter was okay with what seemed like genuine concern. Maybe she wasn't just the ice queen in the tower. Maybe she was something more complicated, something worth understanding. "Okay," he typed, "but I need to arrange childcare. And I can't afford anywhere expensive." "I'll handle both," came the immediate reply. "Give me your address. I'll have a car pick you up at 7. And bring Mia. I'll arrange for someone trustworthy to watch her during dinner." Ethan hesitated, then sent his address. The response was simply, "See you tomorrow." He set down his phone and looked at his daughter, still sleeping against his chest, trusting him completely to keep her safe, to make good choices, to navigate a world that kept getting more complicated. "I hope I know what I'm doing," he whispered to the empty apartment. Mia slept on, dreaming of better things, while her father held her close and wondered what he'd just agreed to. The black car that arrived at Ethan's building the next evening looked like it cost more than everything he owned combined. Sleek, silent, the kind of vehicle that announced wealth so casually it didn't need to shout. The driver, a professional in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the rear door without a word, his expression carefully neutral as he took in the crumbling brick facade and sagging fire escapes. Ethan stood on the sidewalk holding Mia's hand, second-guessing everything. He dressed in his only good shirt and the one pair of pants without visible wear, had combed his hair and scrubbed his hands until they stopped smelling like industrial soap. Mia wore her favorite dress, the purple one with butterflies that she'd picked out herself, her hair in pigtails that had taken Ethan 3 attempts to make even. "Is that our spaceship?" Mia whispered, eyes wide. "That's our ride," Ethan confirmed, though spaceship didn't feel far off. "Remember what we talked about? You're going to stay with a very nice babysitter while I have dinner with someone from work. You'll be safe the whole time, and I'll come get you as soon as we're done." Mia nodded solemnly. She'd been unusually quiet since yesterday's incident at school, like some essential buoyancy had been punctured. It broke Ethan's heart in ways he didn't have time to process. The driver gestured toward the open door. "Ms. Hart is waiting at the restaurant. I'll take you there first, then bring your daughter to the sitter's location." Something in Ethan resisted. "I'd rather see where she's staying first. Meet the person watching her." The driver's expression didn't change, but something in his posture suggested he'd expected this. "Of course, sir. We'll go there first." The interior of the car was leather and climate control, and a silence so complete it felt artificial. Mia pressed her face against the window, watching Queens slide past, her whole world from this new elevated vantage point. The route took them through neighborhoods that got progressively cleaner, buildings that grew taller and more maintained, until they pulled up in front of a brownstone in a part of Brooklyn that Ethan recognized from real estate listings he'd browsed in moments of futile fantasy. The woman who answered the door was in her 60s, with steel gray hair and warm eyes behind practical glasses. She introduced herself as Margaret, former pediatric nurse, currently working as a private childcare provider. Her living room was filled with books and toys arranged with the kind of thoughtful organization that spoke to genuine experience with children. "You must be Mia," Margaret said, crouching to the girl's level. "I have pizza in the kitchen, the good kind, not frozen, and I thought maybe we could build a blanket for it and watch a movie." "Does that sound acceptable?" Mia looked up at Ethan, seeking permission. He nodded, and she took Margaret's offered hand with only slight hesitation. "I'll have my phone on," Ethan told Margaret. "Any problems at all?" "I'll call immediately," Margaret assured him, "but I suspect we'll be just fine, won't we, Mia?" Mia nodded, already eyeing a shelf of books with interest. Ethan kissed the top of his daughter's head and forced himself to leave, to trust a stranger with his most precious thing, because Vivian Hart had arranged it, and he'd agreed to this dinner for reasons he still didn't entirely understand. The restaurant was in Manhattan, naturally, the kind of place with a single name in brushed steel letters, where the host's podium probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. The driver opened his door onto a sidewalk where well-dressed people moved with the casual confidence of those who'd never questioned their right to occupy space. Ethan felt every inch the imposter. His good shirt was 2 seasons out of style, his shoes were scuffed despite his best efforts, and his hands, no matter how much he'd scrubbed, still bore the faint stains and calluses of kitchen work. He almost told the driver to just take him back to Margaret's, to collect Mia and retreat to the safety of their cramped apartment where he belonged. Then he saw Vivian. She stood near the entrance, and for a moment Ethan didn't recognize her. Gone was the severe suit and calculated armor of the CEO. She wore a simple dress in deep green, her hair down around her shoulders instead of pulled back in that ruthless twist. She looked younger somehow, more human. And when she saw him, something crossed her face that looked almost like nervousness. "Ethan." She moved toward him, then seemed uncertain about how to greet him. A handshake felt absurdly formal, but anything else felt presumptuous. They settled on an awkward nod. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for arranging everything." He gestured vaguely back toward the car. "Margaret seems wonderful. Mia liked her immediately. Margaret used to work for my family when I was young. She's one of the few people I trust completely." Vivian paused. "Shall we?" The restaurant's interior was exactly what Ethan expected. Low lighting, hushed conversations, tables spaced for privacy, and a wine list that probably required a sommelier to interpret. The host greeted Vivian by name and led them to a corner table that somehow felt both prominent and secluded. Ethan sat and immediately felt the weight of attention from other diners. People were watching Vivian Hart, because of course they were. She was Manhattan royalty, her presence noteworthy. And by extension, they were watching him, calculating who he might be, why he warranted her attention. "I should have picked somewhere less conspicuous," Vivian said quietly, following his gaze. "I'm sorry. I'm not very good at this." "At what?" "At being," she gestured helplessly, "normal. At having dinner with someone without it being a business strategy or a social obligation. I honestly can't remember the last time I did this." A waiter appeared with water and menus, professionally invisible. Ethan opened his menu and tried not to react to the prices, entrees that cost more than he spent on groceries in a week. Vivian seemed to sense his discomfort. "Order anything you want," she said. "Please, this is my invitation, my expense, and genuinely, I asked you here. Let me at least buy you dinner." The waiter returned and Vivian ordered wine without looking at the list, then glanced at Ethan. He ordered the first pasta dish his eyes landed on, not trusting himself to navigate the menu's French-Italian fusion descriptions. When the waiter left, silence stretched between them. Vivian seemed to be gathering words, trying them out internally before speaking. Finally, "How is Mia?" "Really?" The question caught Ethan off guard with its directness. "She's struggling. Yesterday wasn't an isolated thing, it's just the first time it got physical. Her principal thinks she's carrying too much stress for a 6-year-old. "That's what happens when children lose parents young," Vivian said softly. "They learn too early that the world isn't safe, that the people you love can disappear." Something in her tone made Ethan look at her more carefully. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "My mother died when I was 8, car accident." Vivian's fingers traced patterns on the tablecloth. "One day she was there, the next she wasn't. My father didn't believe in therapy or processing grief. He believed in moving forward, being strong, not dwelling on things you couldn't change. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But her voice said otherwise, said it was yesterday, and always, said some losses didn't diminish with time. My point is, I recognize the signs, the withdrawal, the anger, the testing boundaries to see if the remaining parent will leave too. Mia needs to know you're not going anywhere. I tell her that constantly. She needs to see it more than hear it. Vivian looked at him directly now. Which is why I wanted to talk to you tonight, about your situation, about possibilities. The wine arrived, was poured with ceremony Ethan didn't understand. He took a sip to be polite and tasted something that probably had a story involving French vineyards and optimal rainfall years. What kind of possibilities? He asked carefully. Vivian seemed to choose her words with unusual care. I've been reviewing employment files across the company, looking at people who might be underutilized, whose skills don't match their current positions. Your file stood out. Ethan's stomach tightened. I'm kitchen staff. I don't have skills beyond food prep. Your file says you have an associate's degree in business administration, that you were 3 credits away from a bachelor's when you had to drop out. Vivian pulled out her phone, scrolled through something. You were on track to graduate with honors. Your professors wrote recommendations calling you exceptionally analytical, detail-oriented, and capable of complex problem-solving. The memories surfaced unwillingly. Night classes while Sarah was still healthy, studying at kitchen tables, the dream of a degree that would lead to something better. Then the diagnosis, the medical bills, the impossible choice between education and survival. He'd chosen survival. The degree had become one more casualty of cancer's scorched earth campaign through their lives. That was a different life, Ethan said quietly. I'm not that person anymore. Why not? Because that person had options, had a future that included possibility instead of just endurance. That person died with my wife. The words came out harsher than he intended. Vivian absorbed them without flinching, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle in a way he hadn't heard from her before. What if you could be that person again? What if there was a path back to possibility? Ethan laughed, the sound bitter. Unless you're offering to pay off my wife's medical debt and fund me through another year of college, while somehow also covering rent and childcare, I don't see how. What if I did exactly that? The restaurant noise seemed to fade, the world narrowing to Vivian's face across the table. She wasn't joking. Her expression was completely serious, maybe even hopeful. You can't be serious, Ethan managed. There's a program I've been developing, internal education support for employees who show potential. Tuition coverage, paid time for classes, childcare subsidies, mentorship. It's designed specifically for people in your situation, people who had to sacrifice education for survival, but still have the capacity and drive to do more. That's an incredible program, but surely there are better candidates, people who've been with the company longer. You'd be the first participant, Vivian interrupted. The pilot case. If it works, we'll expand it. If it doesn't, we'll adjust and try again. But I want to start with someone who I know has the character to see it through. She paused. Someone who stood in my office and maintained his dignity when I was actively trying to destroy it. Ethan set down his wine glass before his shaking hands could betray him. Why? Why would you do this for me? Because I owe you an apology that policy changes don't cover. Because I've spent the last week watching you on security footage. You've been watching me? Vivian had the grace to look embarrassed. Not in a creepy way, just observing, seeing how you work, how you interact with people, how you show up every day and do your job with care, even though you're overqualified and underpaid. And I realized something. She stopped as their food arrived, the waiter performing an elaborate presentation of dishes that Ethan barely registered. When they were alone again, Vivian continued, I realized that my father built an empire on the backs of people exactly like you. People with potential who never got the chance to realize it because they were too busy surviving. He called that good business, keeping labor costs low, minimizing investment in human capital. And I've been running the company the exact same way because that's what I was taught success looked like. She picked up her fork but didn't eat, just held it like she needed something to do with her hands. But meeting you, seeing how I treated you and how you responded, it made me question everything. What's the point of building an empire if it's built on crushing the people who make it function? What kind of legacy is that? So this is guilt, Ethan said, and he couldn't keep the edge from his voice. You want to ease your conscience by rescuing one poor kitchen worker and feeling like a philanthropist. No. Vivian's voice was sharp now, a flash of the executive cutting through. This is me recognizing that I have resources I didn't earn through virtue, just through birth and inheritance. And instead of hoarding them or using them to play power games, I could actually help someone who deserves better than what circumstances gave them. But why me specifically? There are thousands of people in worse situations. Because you're here. Because I know you. Because you called me cruel and disappointed and it wrecked me in ways I didn't know I could still be wrecked. Vivian's composure was cracking now, genuine emotion bleeding through. Because when I asked myself who I want to be, the answer wasn't the ice queen who runs a profitable empire. It was someone who sees suffering and has the power to address it and actually does something instead of hiding behind business strategy. The honesty in her voice disarmed him. Ethan looked at this woman across the table, billionaire, CEO, person who'd caused him genuine anguish just days ago, and saw someone wrestling with questions he recognized, questions about worth and purpose, and whether the life you're living is the one you'd choose if you could start over. I don't know if I can accept this, he said finally. It feels like charity, like pity. It's not charity. You'd be working for it. The program requires maintaining performance standards, completing coursework, eventual transition to a role where you're using your education. It's investment, not handout. Vivian leaned forward. And even if it was charity, why is that shameful? You've spent 2 years sacrificing everything for your daughter. Why is it wrong to let someone help carry the weight for once? Because I don't know what you want in return. There it was, the fear he'd been dancing around. People like you don't do something like this without expecting something back. What's the catch? Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. The catch is that I'm lonely. The catch is that I've built my entire life around being untouchable, and now I'm realizing that untouchable and unreachable are the same thing. The catch is that talking to you makes me feel like a person instead of a profit margin. She stopped, seemed to realize how much she'd revealed. But that's not your problem to solve. You asked what I want in return, and the honest answer is, I want to do something that matters. Something more than quarterly earnings and shareholder value. I want to help because I can, because you deserve it, and because maybe it will make me less of the person I was when I tested you. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, not trust exactly, but the possibility of it. The recognition that Vivian Hart was more complicated than he'd assumed, more human beneath the armor she wore. I need time to think about this, he said. It's a lot to process. Of course, take all the time you need. Vivian finally took a bite of her food, then seemed to remember they were supposed to be having dinner. Can we talk about something else? Something that isn't my guilt or your circumstances or any of the heavy things? Like what? Like, she considered. Tell me about Mia. What makes her happy? What does she love? It was such a normal question, so genuinely curious that Ethan found himself answering. He told her about Mia's obsession with butterflies, her conviction that sticks were magic wands, the elaborate stories she invented about strangers. Vivian listened with complete attention, asking follow-up questions, laughing at the funny parts. She sounds extraordinary, Vivian said when Ethan paused, like she sees magic in ordinary things. She does. It's one of my favorite things about her, the way she can find wonder in anything. Ethan smiled despite the weight of the evening. I'm terrified she'll lose that the world will beat it out of her the way it does to everyone eventually. Maybe she won't. Maybe having you as a father, someone who protects that wonder instead of dismissing it, will let her keep it longer than most. The compliment landed awkwardly, but Ethan accepted it with a nod. They ate in more comfortable silence now, the tension from earlier dissipating into something almost peaceful. Vivian told him about her own childhood, about growing up in a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home, about her father's impossible standards and her mother's absence. She talked about business school and the pressure of inheriting an empire she'd never asked for, about board members who'd spent years waiting for her to fail so they could prove a woman couldn't run a company like Hart Industries. "Do you like it?" Ethan asked. "Running the company, being CEO, is it what you wanted?" Vivian considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I don't know if I ever asked myself what I wanted. It was always just what was expected. My father made it very clear that the company was my responsibility, my legacy to protect. Questioning whether I wanted that felt like questioning my purpose. But now I wonder if maybe purpose is something you choose, not something you inherit." She met his eyes. "You chose to be the kind of father Mia needs. That's purpose. Everything else is just circumstance." The observation was so unexpectedly insightful that Ethan didn't know how to respond. They'd moved past polite dinner conversation into territory that felt dangerous and intimate in ways he hadn't anticipated. Vivian seemed to sense it too. She glanced at her watch and something shifted in her expression. "I should get you back to Mia. She's probably wondering where you are." The waiter was summoned, the check handled so discreetly Ethan never saw it. They walked to the car in silence that felt full rather than empty, weighted with things said and unsaid. In the car, Vivian sat beside him instead of maintaining professional distance, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that probably had a French name, close enough to notice details he'd missed in her office, the faint scar on her wrist, the way her hands never quite relaxed even when the rest of her seemed calm. Can I ask you something?" Vivian said as Manhattan lights streaked past the windows. "You can ask. When you stood in my office and I told you that you were fired, what were you thinking? In that exact moment, what went through your mind?" Ethan thought back to that morning that felt both recent and impossibly distant. "Honestly, I was calculating. $43 in my checking account, rent due in 9 days, how long I could stretch the food in my pantry, whether I could find another job fast enough to avoid eviction, every catastrophic domino that would fall from that one moment. And then I looked at you and realized you wanted me to beg, that you were waiting to see me break. And I decided I wouldn't give you the satisfaction." He looked at her directly now. "I decided that even if I lost everything, I'd lose it with my dignity intact, because that's the one thing you couldn't take from me unless I gave it away." Vivian's expression was pained. "I'm sorry I put you in that position. I'm sorry I thought that was acceptable behavior, that testing people's breaking points was somehow valid business practice. I'm sorry I was that person." "Was?" Ethan asked gently. "Or are?" "I'm trying to be different. I don't know if I'm succeeding, but I'm trying." The car pulled up in front of Margaret's brownstone. Through the window, Ethan could see warm light and the shadow of movement inside. Mia, safe and cared for by a stranger he'd trusted on Vivian Hart's word. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "For the dinner, for the conversation, for the offer. I meant what I said. I need time to think about the program. It's a big decision." "I understand. Take whatever time you need." Vivian paused, then added, "But Ethan, whatever you decide about the program, I hope we can keep talking. As people, not as CEO and employee. I've enjoyed this more than I've enjoyed anything in a very long time." There was vulnerability in her voice that made Ethan's next words come easier than they should have. "I'd like that too." He got out of the car and walked to Margaret's door, felt Vivian's eyes on him until he disappeared inside. Margaret met him with a smile. "Mia's in the living room. She's had pizza. We built an excellent fort, and she only asked when you were coming back approximately 60 times. I'd call that a successful evening." Ethan found his daughter curled up in a nest of blankets and pillows, fighting sleep while trying to finish a Disney movie she'd clearly seen before. When she saw him, her face lit up with relief and joy that made his heart crack. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him, and he caught her, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and Margaret's house and childhood safety. "I missed you." "I missed you too, baby. Did you have fun?" "Margaret is nice. She has the best blankets. Can we come back?" Ethan looked at Margaret, who nodded with warm understanding. "You're welcome any time." In the car ride home, a different driver this time, but the same expensive silence, Mia chattered about her evening, her earlier melancholy temporarily forgotten in the excitement of new experiences. Ethan held her close and let her words wash over him, grounding him in what mattered. Their apartment building looked shabbier than ever after an evening in Manhattan's polished world. But when Ethan carried a sleepy Mia up the stairs and unlocked their door to the familiar mess of their life, it felt like home in ways that restaurant never could. He tucked Mia into bed, kissed her forehead, waited until her breathing evened into sleep. Then he sat on his pull-out couch and thought about Vivian's offer. Education. Possibility. A path back to the life he'd planned before cancer and death and survival had rewritten everything. It would mean accepting help from someone who'd hurt him. Would mean trusting a billionaire's sudden attack of conscience. Would mean risking Mia's stability on the bet that Vivian Hart was actually trying to change instead of just performing guilt. But it would also mean a future for Mia that looked different than endless struggle. Would mean showing her that sometimes people could choose to be better, that help could be accepted with dignity instead of shame. Ethan pulled out his phone and looked at the message thread with Vivian. The cursor blinked in the empty text box, waiting for his decision. He thought about his daughter asking if they were poor, about Principal Morrison saying he couldn't do it alone forever, about Vivian's face when she'd admitted to being lonely at the top of her glass tower. Finally, he typed, "I want to accept your offer, but I need to understand the full terms, what's expected, what happens if it doesn't work out. Can we meet to discuss details?" The response came within seconds. "Yes. My office tomorrow? Or somewhere else if you'd prefer." Ethan considered, then made a decision that surprised himself. "Come to my apartment. If you're going to invest in my life, you should see what it actually looks like." There was a longer pause this time, then, "What's your address?" He sent it, then added, "Fair warning, it's not much, and the building smells like cabbage in the hallways." "I'll bring coffee," Vivian replied. "Saturday morning, 10 a.m.? See you then." Ethan set down his phone and looked around his cramped apartment, the water-stained ceiling, the kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, the single bedroom that housed all his daughter's dreams. This was his life. This was what he'd built from the wreckage of loss and grief. And maybe, possibly, it was about to change. He lay back on the pull-out couch and stared at the South America stain above him, thinking about possibility and risk and the strange turn his life had taken. Outside, the city hummed with its endless rhythms, sirens and conversations, and the rattle of the train in the distance. Somewhere across that city, Vivian Hart was probably lying awake in her penthouse, thinking similar thoughts about risk and change and the terrifying prospect of letting someone see who you really were beneath all the armor. Two people from different worlds, circling the possibility of connection like it was something dangerous and necessary at once. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind was too full of tomorrow, of coffee in his cramped apartment, and conversations about futures that might actually include hope. For the first time in 2 years, possibility felt like more than a fantasy. It felt like something he could almost reach. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of spring weather that made Queens almost beautiful, sunshine cutting through the gaps between buildings, warming the cracked sidewalks where weeds pushed through concrete with stubborn optimism. Ethan woke early despite having slept poorly, his mind too full of what the day might bring to allow proper rest. Mia was still asleep, sprawled across her bed in the boneless abandon of childhood, one arm flung over her favorite stuffed elephant. Ethan stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her breathe, feeling the familiar weight of love and responsibility and fear that came with being someone's entire world. He spent the next hour cleaning. Not that the apartment could ever look like the places Vivian was used to, but he could at least make it presentably shabby instead of embarrassingly so. He scrubbed the kitchen counter, wiped down surfaces, picked up the scattered evidence of their life, and tried to organize it into something that suggested competence instead of barely controlled chaos. At 9:30, Mia wandered out of her room, rubbing her eyes. "Why are you cleaning so much? It's Saturday." "We have a visitor coming," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. "Ms. Hart, from my work. She's going to talk to me about some job stuff." Mia's eyes widened. "The fancy building lady? She's coming here?" "She's just a person, baby. Same as anyone else." But even as he said it, Ethan wasn't sure he believed it. Vivian Hart wasn't the same as anyone else. She existed in a different stratum of reality, where cars arrived on command and problems were solved by writing checks. Bringing that world into his cramped apartment felt like mixing elements that weren't meant to combine. At exactly 10 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Ethan checked through the peephole, a habit from living in a neighborhood where caution was survival, and saw Vivian standing in his hallway, looking almost comically out of place. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, clearly attempting to dress down. But everything about her still screamed expensive. The jeans probably cost more than Ethan's monthly grocery budget. The sweater was cashmere. And she was holding 2 coffee cups from a shop he recognized as the kind where a small coffee cost $7. He opened the door, and Vivian's careful composure faltered slightly as she took in the reality of where he lived. Not with judgment, exactly, but with the visible recalibration of someone confronting something they'd intellectually understood but never viscerally experienced. "Hi," she said, offering one of the coffees. "I wasn't sure how you take it, so I got it black with sugar and cream on the side." "Black is fine, thank you." Ethan stepped back to let her in, acutely aware of how small the space was, how her presence seemed to shrink it further. "Come in. Sorry about everything." Vivian stepped inside and stood in the center of his living room, which was also his bedroom, which was also effectively his entire living space, aside from Mia's room and the bathroom. Her eyes took in the pull-out couch, the water stain on the ceiling, the kitchen that was less a room and more a suggestion of functionality tucked into a corner. But when she spoke, her voice was gentle. "You've made it nice. Warm." "It's a dump," Ethan said flatly. "You don't have to pretend otherwise." "I'm not pretending. I've been in million-dollar apartments that felt like mausoleums. This feels like people actually live here, like it's a home." She gestured to Mia's artwork covering the refrigerator. "That matters more than square footage." Before Ethan could respond, Mia emerged from her bedroom, drawn by the sound of an unfamiliar voice. She stopped in the doorway, suddenly shy, taking in the stranger in their apartment. Vivian crouched down to Mia's level with surprising ease. "Hi, you must be Mia. I'm Vivian. Your dad works with me." Mia studied her with the serious assessment children used when deciding whether adults were trustworthy. "You're really pretty." Vivian looked genuinely surprised by the compliment. "Thank you. So are you. I love your butterfly dress." "It's my favorite. Butterflies are the most magical insects because they used to be caterpillars, and then they change into something completely different." Mia's shyness was evaporating in the face of someone who seemed genuinely interested. "Did you know some butterflies migrate thousands of miles?" "I did know that, actually. Monarch butterflies, right?" Mia's face lit up. "You know about monarchs. Daddy, she knows about monarchs." Ethan watched this exchange with something like wonder. He'd expected Vivian to be awkward with children, uncomfortable with their chaos and unfiltered honesty. Instead, she engaged with Mia like she genuinely cared about butterfly migration patterns. "Mia, why don't you go play in your room for a bit while I talk to Ms. Hart about work stuff?" Ethan suggested. "Can I show her my butterfly collection first, please?" Ethan looked at Vivian, who nodded with what appeared to be sincere interest. Mia grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the bedroom, and Vivian allowed herself to be led, careful not to knock anything over in the tight hallway. The bedroom was tiny, barely big enough for the twin bed, the small dresser, and the bookshelf that held more toys than books. But Mia had made it her kingdom, decorated with her own artwork and the butterfly cutouts she'd made from construction paper. "This is my collection," Mia announced, pointing to the wall where she'd taped dozens of hand-drawn butterflies in various stages of artistic competence. "I'm going to draw every kind of butterfly that exists. Daddy says there's more than 20,000 species, so it might take a while." Vivian studied the wall with genuine attention. "These are beautiful. This one here," she pointed to a particularly elaborate drawing. "Is that a swallowtail?" "Yes!" Mia bounced with excitement. "How did you know?" "I used to draw butterflies when I was your age." Vivian's voice was soft with memory. "My mother loved them. She had a garden specifically designed to attract butterflies, and we'd spend hours watching them." Something in her expression made Ethan's chest ache. This wasn't the CEO, the Ice Queen, the woman who'd tested him with calculated cruelty. This was someone who'd been a child once, who'd lost her mother and kept drawing butterflies like they could somehow bring her back. Your mom sounds nice, Mia said with the straightforward compassion of children who understood loss. She was. I miss her a lot. I miss my mom too. She died when I was little. Vivian met Ethan's eyes over Mia's head, and he saw the recognition there, the understanding of shared grief, the kinship of children who'd learned too young that the world could take everything. I'm sorry, Vivian said quietly. That's really hard. Yeah. Mia leaned against her, the stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger anymore. But Daddy takes good care of me. He's the best dad in the whole world. Ethan had to look away, his throat suddenly tight. When he could trust his voice, he said, Mia, sweetheart, let Ms. Hart and I talk for a bit, okay? You can watch TV if you want. Mia nodded and grabbed her tablet, settling onto her bed with the easy adaptability of children. Vivian followed Ethan back to the living room, her expression thoughtful. She's wonderful, Vivian said as Ethan gestured for her to sit on the couch. He took the folding chair from the corner, maintaining some physical distance. Truly, you've done an incredible job with her. I'm trying. Some days are better than others. Vivian wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, seeming to need something to hold. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. How do you do it? How do you show up every day, work a job you're overqualified for, come home to this, she gestured around the apartment, and still give Mia what she needs? Where does that strength come from? Ethan considered the question, really considered it instead of deflecting with something easy. I don't think it's strength exactly. I think it's just love combined with not having any other choice. Mia needs me to keep going, so I keep going. Some days that looks like strength, and some days it looks like just barely holding on. But either way, I keep going. That's strength, Vivian insisted. That's exactly what strength is. Continuing even when you don't feel capable. Because someone depends on you. Then what you're doing is strength too, Ethan countered. Recognizing you've been operating one way and choosing to try something different. That takes courage. Vivian looked startled, like the possibility hadn't occurred to her. I'm just trying to do one thing that isn't purely transactional. One thing that actually matters beyond quarterly earnings. So let's talk about this program, the real details, not the aspirational version. Vivian pulled out her phone, opened a document, but didn't read from it. Instead, she looked at Ethan directly. Full tuition coverage for completing your bachelor's degree, accredited institution of your choice, flexible scheduling around your work commitments, childcare subsidy of up to $1,500 a month, enough to cover a safe after-school program and backup care. You'd continue working at current wages while taking classes, but once you complete your degree, there'd be a position waiting in our operations management division, starting salary of $75,000. The numbers landed like physical objects. Ethan sat very still, trying to process them. $1,500 a month for childcare alone would change his life. $75,000 would be more money than he'd ever imagined earning. What if I fail a class? He asked. What if it takes me longer than expected to graduate? Then we adjust. This isn't a punitive arrangement. It's an investment. If you're making good faith effort and something goes wrong, we troubleshoot together. The only grounds for termination of the program would be academic dishonesty or abandoning classes without communication. And what do you get out of this? What's your return on investment? Vivian was quiet for a moment. Honestly, if this works, I get a model for a program that could change dozens of lives. I get to prove to my board that investing in people isn't just ethical, it's good business. That someone like you, given resources and opportunity, will become an invaluable employee precisely because you understand what it's like to struggle. And if it doesn't work, then I learn what went wrong and try something different next time. She leaned forward. Ethan, I'm not going to pretend this is purely altruistic. I'm hoping to get a valuable employee out of this arrangement, but I'm also hoping to sleep better at night, to look at myself in the mirror and see someone who actually helps, instead of just hoarding wealth and power. The honesty was disarming. Ethan wanted to find the catch, the hidden angle, but Vivian's face showed nothing but genuine intent. I have conditions, he heard himself say. Name them. First, this can't affect Mia negatively. If at any point the stress or time commitment starts hurting her, I stop. She comes first, always. Agreed. That's not even a question. Second, I need this in writing. Formal contract, legally binding. Not because I don't trust you, but because trust isn't the same as protection. Absolutely. I'll have legal draft something this week. Third, Ethan hesitated, then pushed forward. I want to know why. Really why. Not the version about board presentations and business models. Why me, specifically? Vivian set down her coffee and looked at him with an intensity that made him want to look away. Because when I tested you, you showed me who I'd become. You held up a mirror and I didn't like what I saw reflected back. And I realized I could either defend that person, justify her actions as necessary for success, or I could try to become someone different. She stood, moved to the window that looked out on the building across the alley, another aging structure full of people barely managing. You asked me at dinner if I like running my company. The truth is, I don't know if I've ever asked myself what I like. I've spent 34 years doing what was expected, what was necessary, what would make me successful by my father's definition. And it's left me alone in a penthouse apartment talking to security footage because I don't know how to connect with actual humans. The vulnerability in her voice was absolute. Ethan felt it like a physical thing, heavy in the small space between them. So yes, this program will be good business if it works. Yes, you're a pilot case that could lead to broader policy. But on a personal level, I'm doing this because talking to you makes me feel human again. Because Mia looked at me like I was worth trusting. Because, for the first time in years, I'm doing something that might actually matter beyond profit margins. Silence filled the apartment. From Mia's room came the soft sounds of her tablet, some educational game about ocean animals. Outside, the Saturday sounds of the neighborhood, children playing, music from open windows, the distant rumble of traffic. Okay, Ethan said finally. Okay, I'll do it. Vivian turned from the window, and he could see the relief in her face. Really? Really, on the conditions we discussed. In writing, legally binding, with the understanding that Mia's well-being is the priority. He stood, extending his hand. Thank you. For the opportunity, for the honesty, for seeing potential I'd stopped believing I had. Vivian took his hand, and the shake was firm, professional, but neither of them let go immediately, the moment extending into something that felt like more than business. Then Mia's voice called from the bedroom. Daddy, can Ms. Hart stay for lunch? I want to show her how to make grilled cheese the way we do it. Vivian looked at Ethan with something like hope. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. Mia's right. You should stay. See the full reality of what you're investing in. Then I'd love to. Lunch was grilled cheese sandwiches made on the ancient stove that required specific knowledge of which burner actually worked, served with tomato soup from a can that Mia insisted tasted better if you added exactly 3 crackers, crushed up. Vivian sat at their tiny table, really just a folding card table with mismatched chairs, and ate like it was the finest meal she'd had in months. This is delicious, she said, and sounded like she meant it. It's Kraft Singles and store-brand bread, Ethan pointed out. It's perfect. Vivian watched Mia carefully separate her sandwich into perfect triangles. Sometimes the best things are the simple ones. Mia launched into an elaborate story about a girl at school who claimed her family's grilled cheese was better because they used fancy cheese from France, which Mia found highly suspicious since cheese is cheese and France is really far away. Vivian listened with complete attention, asking follow-up questions, treating a 6-year-old's cafeteria politics like they mattered. After lunch, Mia insisted on teaching Vivian how to play her favorite card game, a simplified version of Go Fish that had rules Mia changed whenever they suited her. Vivian played along with good humor, letting Mia win but not obviously, treating the game with the seriousness it deserved. Ethan watched from the kitchen while washing dishes, this surreal tableau of a billionaire CEO sitting cross-legged on his floor playing cards with his daughter. 2 days ago, this would have been unimaginable. Now it felt almost natural, like maybe different worlds could overlap without destroying each other. His phone buzzed with a text. He dried his hands and checked it, then felt his stomach drop. The message was from a number he didn't recognize, but the attached image made it immediately clear what this was. A photograph, slightly blurry but unmistakable. Vivian Hart carrying a small child, Mia, though her face was turned away, into what looked like an emergency room entrance, a man, Ethan, barely visible, beside them. The text read, "Interesting company the Ice Queen is keeping these days. What's the story here?" TMZ. Ethan's hands went cold. He looked up at Vivian, who was laughing at something Mia had said, completely unaware that their week-old hospital visit had been photographed and was about to become entertainment news fodder. "Vivian," he said quietly, "we have a problem." She looked up, caught something in his expression, immediately sobered. "What is it?" He showed her the phone. Vivian's face went very still as she read the message and studied the photograph. When she looked up, her expression was complicated. Anger, fear, and something that looked like resignation. "When was this taken?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Last week, when Mia spiked a fever during my shift and you drove us to the hospital." Ethan felt panic rising in his chest. "How did they even get this? How did they know to ask you about it?" "Someone at the hospital probably recognized me, sold the photo to TMZ." Vivian's jaw was tight. "This is my fault. I should have been more careful, should have thought about the possibility of cameras." Mia looked between them, sensing the adult tension even if she didn't understand it. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, baby," Ethan said automatically. Then to Vivian, "What happens now?" "Now TMZ runs a story speculating about who you are and what our relationship is. My board will see it. They'll have questions." She stood, pacing the small space. "They're going to make this complicated." "How complicated?" Vivian's phone rang before she could answer. She looked at the screen, and something in her expression hardened. "It's my board chairman. I need to take this." She stepped into Mia's room for privacy. Ethan could hear the murmur of her voice through the thin wall. Couldn't make out words, but could hear the tone shifting from professional to defensive to something sharp and angry. When she emerged 5 minutes later, her face was a mask of controlled fury. "They've called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. They want an explanation for the photograph and my relationship with you." She looked at Ethan directly. "This is going to get messy. They're going to try to use this as evidence that I'm making irrational decisions, that I'm letting personal feelings interfere with business judgment." "Are you?" Ethan asked quietly. Vivian stopped pacing. "I don't know. Maybe. But the alternative is running my life and my company based on what my board thinks is appropriate, and I'm done with that." Her phone buzzed again, multiple texts arriving in rapid succession. She glanced at them and her expression grew grimmer. "It's already online." TMZ posted the photo with the headline, "Ice Queen Melting? Heart Industries CEO spotted with mystery man and child." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, feeling helpless. "If I'd known there were cameras. This isn't your fault. This is the price of being public, of having money and power. Every moment is potentially surveillance. Every relationship is fodder for speculation." She sat back down heavily. "I just wish they hadn't dragged you and Mia into it." Mia had been watching this exchange with growing concern. Now she climbed into Vivian's lap with the unselfconscious comfort of a child who'd decided someone was safe. "Are you sad?" Vivian wrapped her arms around Mia automatically, and something in her face softened. "A little bit. Some people took pictures of us, and now they're asking questions that feel invasive." "That's rude. Daddy says taking pictures of people without permission is rude." "Your daddy is right." Vivian looked at Ethan over Mia's head. "I need to go. Need to prepare for Monday, figure out how to handle this. But I want you to know this doesn't change anything about the program, about my commitment to helping you. Regardless of what my board says or what gossip sites print, that offer stands." "What if they make you choose?" Ethan asked. "Between your position and helping me?" Vivian's expression was fierce. "Then they'll find out exactly how tired I am of choosing based on other people's expectations." She stood, gently setting Mia down. "Thank you for lunch, for letting me into your home, for trusting me despite having every reason not to. Thank you for coming, for being honest, for caring about Mia's butterfly collection." Ethan walked her to the door. "Good luck Monday, with whatever happens. I'll call you after, let you know how it goes." She paused in the doorway. "Ethan, I meant what I said earlier about feeling human around you. Whatever happens Monday, I'm grateful for that." Then she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the hallway that still smelled like cabbage and lives lived on tight margins. Ethan closed the door and leaned against it, his mind spinning. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern was whether he could accept Vivian's help with dignity. Now he was apparently part of a media story, fodder for speculation about billionaire romance and mystery children. "Is Ms. Hart going to be okay?" Mia asked, looking worried. "I think so, baby. She's pretty tough. I like her. She knows about butterflies and she plays cards right, and she didn't make fun of our apartment." "I like her too," Ethan admitted, which might be part of the problem. That night, after Mia was asleep, Ethan sat in the darkness of his pull-out couch and scrolled through the online coverage. TMZ had indeed posted the photo, and the comments section was exactly the nightmare he'd expected. Speculation about who he was ranged from secret boyfriend to charity case to more creative theories involving everything from corporate espionage to witness protection. Someone had already identified him, a supposed source claiming he worked in Hart Tower's restaurant. Another commenter had found his social media, the sparse, rarely updated accounts he maintained mostly to see photos of Mia's friends' parents shared, and posted screenshots. Within hours, strangers on the internet knew his daughter's name, knew he was widowed, knew he lived in Queens. The violation of it made him physically ill. His phone rang, and Ethan almost didn't answer, but the number was Vivian's, so he picked up. "I'm so sorry." Her voice was raw. "They've identified you. People are digging into your life. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid." "It's not your fault." "It absolutely is. I should have known better, should have been more careful, should have protected you and Mia from this." She sounded wrecked, furious at herself. "I'm having my legal team send cease and desist letters to anyone posting about Mia. She's a minor, there are protections. But for you, I'm an adult. I knew the risks when I agreed to dinner." Ethan surprised himself with how calm he sounded. "We'll deal with it. People will get bored and move on to the next story." "But the board won't. They're going to use this, going to claim I'm compromised, that my judgment is affected by personal involvement." Vivian's voice dropped. "They're going to try to force me out, replace me with someone who'll run the company the way my father did. Pure profit, no conscience, no deviation from shareholder value above all else." "So what are you going to do?" The silence stretched. Then quietly, "I'm going to fight. I'm going to that meeting Monday, and I'm going to tell them the truth. That yes, I've been making different choices lately. That yes, those choices are influenced by recognizing the humanity of people I'd previously treated as resources. And that if they don't like it, they're welcome to try to remove me. Vivian, I know it's risky. I know I could lose everything, but I've spent my whole life playing it safe, doing what was expected, building an empire I don't even like very much. And I'm tired. I'm so tired of being someone I'm not proud of." Ethan heard the echo of his own words from her office, his disappointment that had apparently cut deeper than he'd realized. "You don't have to blow up your life to prove you're changing." "Maybe I do. Maybe that's exactly what it takes, burning down the version of yourself you've outgrown so something better can emerge." She laughed, the sound bitter. "Your daughter would probably say I'm like a butterfly, destroying the caterpillar to become something that can fly." "Butterflies don't choose that transformation. It's biological imperative. Maybe this is too. Maybe I've reached the point where staying the same would kill me, even if changing is terrifying." They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting from crisis management to philosophy to the kind of vulnerable honesty that only seemed possible in darkness over phone lines. Vivian told him about her father's death, about inheriting a company at 23 and spending the next decade trying to prove she deserved it. Ethan told her about Sarah's final weeks, about the impossible choice between staying at her bedside and working enough to pay medical bills. By the time they hung up, it was past midnight. Ethan lay in the darkness and thought about transformation, about the violence of change, about Vivian Hart walking into a board meeting Monday morning to defend choices that were really about defending the possibility of becoming someone different. He thought about Mia's butterflies on the wall, each one representing hours of careful drawing, the patient accumulation of something beautiful. And he thought about the chrysalis stage she'd told him about once, how the caterpillar literally dissolved itself, broke down into primordial soup, before reassembling into something that could fly. Maybe that's what Vivian was doing, dissolving the Ice Queen so something more human could emerge. Ethan just hoped she survived the process. Sunday passed in tense waiting. Ethan took Mia to the park, where other parents gave him strange looks. Had they seen the photos, recognized him as the mystery man? Or was he just paranoid? He kept his head down, focused on Mia, tried to pretend nothing had changed. But Monday was coming. The board meeting was coming. And Ethan had the sick feeling that whatever happened in that conference room would determine not just Vivian's future, but his and Mia's as well. Because he'd accepted her offer, had let himself believe in possibility, in transformation, in the chance that his life could look different than endless survival. And now that possibility hung in the balance, dependent on whether a billionaire could convince a room of other billionaires that caring about people was worth more than quarterly profits. Ethan held Mia's hand as they walked home through lengthening shadows, and tried to believe that somewhere in that glass tower, Vivian Hart was preparing to fight for something that actually mattered. Monday morning broke cold and gray over Manhattan, the kind of weather that matched the tension coiling in Vivian's chest as she stood in her penthouse preparing for battle. She'd chosen her armor carefully, the midnight suit that made her look untouchable, the heels that added 3 inches of authority, hair pulled back so severely it felt like a physical reminder to stay sharp. The Ice Queen. One last time. But her hands shook as she fastened her watch, and she had to pause, press her palms flat against the marble counter, breathe through the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The board meeting was at 9. She had 2 hours to prepare for a confrontation that could end with her losing everything she'd spent a decade building. And somewhere in Queens, Ethan Cole was probably getting Mia ready for school, living his normal Monday morning, trusting that Vivian would fight for the future she'd promised him. She couldn't let him down. Wouldn't. Her phone buzzed with the text from her attorney. Board is already assembled. They moved the meeting up. Get here now. Vivian's stomach dropped. They were trying to catch her off balance, deny her preparation time. Classic boardroom warfare tactics, and she'd used them herself often enough to recognize the strategy. She grabbed her briefcase and headed for the elevator, her mind racing through scenarios, counterarguments, the chess game of corporate power she'd mastered years ago. But this time felt different. This time she wasn't fighting for market share or quarterly earnings. This time she was fighting for the right to be someone different than who her father had trained her to be. The Hart Tower boardroom occupied the entire 62nd floor, 2 levels above Vivian's office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Manhattan that had witnessed countless corporate victories and defeats. The long table was already full when Vivian arrived. 12 board members, all men over 50, all wearing expressions that ranged from concern to barely concealed hostility. Board Chairman Richard Caldwell sat at the head of the table, his silver hair and expensive suit the very picture of old money and older power. He'd been her father's closest friend, had voted to install Vivian as CEO mostly because he'd believed she'd be easy to control. That miscalculation had been eating at him for years. "Vivian, good of you to join us." His tone made it clear he didn't think it was good at all. "We've been reviewing some concerning developments regarding your recent behavior." Vivian took her seat at the opposite end of the table, setting down her briefcase with deliberate calm. "You mean the photograph that TMZ published? Let's not dance around it, Richard. The photograph raises serious questions about your judgment." "But she's..." This from Gerald Hartwick, who controlled 15% of the company's shares and had never forgiven Vivian for blocking his attempt to gut the employee pension fund. "Care to explain why you were photographed entering a hospital with an employee and his child?" "The employee's daughter had a medical emergency during work hours. I provided transportation to ensure she received prompt care. It seemed like the humane thing to do." Vivian kept her voice level, professional. "I wasn't aware that compassion had become a corporate liability." "Compassion that gets photographed and splashed across gossip sites is a liability," Caldwell said sharply. "This company's value is built on your image as a tough, unsentimental leader. The Ice Queen, as the media calls you. That brand doesn't align with playing nursemaid to kitchen staff." The casual dismissal of Ethan as kitchen staff, the reduction of Mia's fever and fear to playing nursemaid, it hit Vivian like a physical blow. This was what she'd been, what they wanted her to remain. Someone who measured human worth in job titles and revenue contribution. "Perhaps it's time to evolve that brand," Vivian said carefully. "The Ice Queen image was useful for establishing authority in a male-dominated industry. But it's not sustainable long term, and it's not representative of the kind of company I want to build. The kind of company you want to build? Hartwick's voice dripped contempt. Last I checked, this company belongs to shareholders, not to your personal vision of enlightened leadership. And as CEO, I'm responsible for long-term value creation, not just short-term profit. Vivian pulled out her tablet, called up the presentation she'd prepared over the weekend. Since taking over as CEO, I've increased company value by 43%, outperformed our competitors by an average of 12% annually, and maintained consistent growth even through economic downturns. My leadership has been objectively successful by every metric that matters. Until now. Caldwell leaned forward. These recent policy changes, protected scheduling for parents, education subsidies, increased childcare benefits, they're expensive. They reduce operational efficiency. And they all seem to coincide with your involvement with this employee, this Ethan Cole. The way he said Ethan's name, like it was something distasteful, made Vivian's hands clench under the table. Those policies are investments in employee retention and productivity. Studies show— We're not interested in studies, Hartwick interrupted. We're interested in the fact that you've been making increasingly erratic decisions that suggest your judgment is compromised by personal involvement with an employee. My judgment is not compromised. It's evolved. There's a difference. Is there? Caldwell pulled out his own tablet, and Vivian's heart sank as she recognized what was coming. We've been reviewing your communications, corporate email, company phone records, all completely legal under the oversight clause in your contract, and what we found is concerning. He projected an email onto the screen behind Vivian. Her own words, the message she'd sent to HR about implementing the education support program, the one that explicitly named Ethan Cole as the pilot participant. You've been planning to give this man, this minimum wage kitchen worker, a full scholarship, childcare subsidies, and a guaranteed management position upon degree completion. All this for someone you claim to have no personal relationship with, yet you're texting at midnight, having private dinners with, visiting at his home. Caldwell's voice hardened. It looks like favoritism at best, and at worst, it looks like you're using company resources to pursue a personal relationship. The room went silent. Every board member was watching Vivian, waiting to see how she'd defend herself against charges that were technically accurate even if they missed the entire point. Vivian stood slowly, walked to the window, looked out at the city where millions of people were starting their Monday mornings, where Ethan was probably dropping Mia at school, unaware that his future was being decided in a boardroom he'd never see. When she turned back to face the board, something had shifted in her expression. The Ice Queen was gone, melted away, leaving someone more vulnerable, but also more certain. You're right, she said quietly. I have been making different choices. I have been questioning the way this company operates. And yes, it started with meeting Ethan Cole and realizing that I'd become someone I didn't recognize anymore. Caldwell's expression turned triumphant, like he'd won, but Vivian wasn't finished. I subjected him to a psychological test that was cruel and unnecessary. I threatened his livelihood as an experiment in human behavior because I'd been taught that power means never considering the cost of your actions to people with less power than you. And when he responded with more dignity than I'd shown in years of running this company, it forced me to look at who I'd become. She moved back to the table, placed her hands flat on its polished surface, met each board member's eyes in turn. My father built this company on the principle that employees are resources to be exploited for maximum efficiency. That caring about their lives, their families, their futures was weakness. That the only thing that mattered was profit. And I inherited that philosophy along with his company, never questioning whether it was right because it was certainly effective. Your father's philosophy built a billion-dollar empire, Caldwell said sharply. Perhaps you should be grateful instead of criticizing. My father died alone and unloved, with more money than he could ever spend and no one to share it with. Is that really the model we want to follow? Vivian's voice was steady now, certain. I don't want to be 70 years old with a profitable company and no meaningful relationships. I don't want to die the way he did, surrounded by wealth and utterly isolated from humanity. This is exactly what we were afraid of, Hartwick said. You're making emotional decisions, letting personal feelings override business judgment. No, I'm making human decisions, I'm recognizing that the people who work for this company are not resources. They're people with lives and families and potential that we've been systematically wasting because it was cheaper to keep them desperate than to invest in their growth. Vivian pulled up another file on her tablet. Do you know how many employees we have who are overqualified for their positions? Who took whatever job they could get because they needed survival wages, then got stuck there because they couldn't afford the time or money to advance? She projected the statistics she'd compiled. Hundreds of employees with partial degrees, with skills being wasted in positions far below their capability, with potential that was never going to be realized because the company had no mechanism for internal advancement beyond favoritism and luck. Ethan Cole is brilliant. He has most of a business degree. He's analytical and detail-oriented, and he's been washing dishes for 2 years because his wife's medical bills destroyed his ability to finish his education. We are wasting his potential. We are wasting hundreds of employees' potential. And doing so isn't just morally questionable, it's bad business. So your solution is to throw money at every sob story in the building? Caldwell's voice was heavy with disdain. My solution is to create systems that identify and develop talent regardless of where it currently sits in the organization. To invest in people who've proven their work ethic and ability, giving them paths to advancement that don't require them to be born wealthy or lucky. Vivian straightened. The education program I'm proposing would cost approximately $5 million annually. Our marketing budget last year was $40 million, most of it on ads that generated negligible return. Tell me which is the wiser investment. That's not the point, Hartwick started, but Vivian cut him off. That's exactly the point. You're not actually concerned about the money or the business case. You're concerned that I'm deviating from the model my father established, that I'm suggesting there might be a better way to run this company than pure ruthless extraction of value from vulnerable people. My father knew how to make money and nothing else. He didn't know how to build loyalty, how to create a culture where people actually want to excel, how to tap into the potential sitting right in front of him. Vivian's voice was passionate now, all pretense of corporate calm abandoned. And yes, meeting Ethan Cole showed me that. Yes, I've developed respect for him that goes beyond employer and employee. But that doesn't invalidate the business case for change. It validates it. Because if we're missing the potential in someone like him, how many others are we missing? The board was silent now, some members looking uncomfortable, others openly hostile. Caldwell's face was red with anger, barely held in check. This is unacceptable, he said flatly. You're compromised. You're letting personal feelings drive corporate policy. We cannot allow, then remove me. Vivian's words fell like stones into the silence. That's what this meeting is really about, isn't it? You want me gone so you can install someone who will run the company exactly the way my father did. So do it. Call the vote. Force me out. But understand that if you do, I won't go quietly. Are you threatening us? Hartwick's voice was dangerous. I'm promising you transparency. If you remove me for trying to make this company more humane, I will make sure every media outlet in the country knows why. I'll make sure the public understands that Hart Industries chose profit margins over people, that you'd rather maintain the Ice Queen brand than evolve into something better. You'd destroy your own reputation. My reputation as what? A ruthless CEO who treats employees like disposable resources? I'm happy to destroy that reputation. In fact, I'm planning to. Vivian pulled out her phone, opened a draft press release she'd written at 3 a.m. when sleep proved impossible. This is a statement I'm prepared to release regardless of what happens in this meeting. It explains the new education program, the policy changes for parents, and my commitment to transforming Hart Industries into a company that values people as much as profits. She projected it onto the screen. The board members read in silence, and Vivian watched their faces shift as they realized she was serious, that this wasn't a bluff or a negotiating position. She was genuinely prepared to burn it all down rather than continue being who they wanted her to be. You're insane, Caldwell said finally. You'll tank our stock price, destroy investor confidence. Or I'll prove that a company can be both profitable and ethical, that investing in people creates value instead of destroying it, that there's a better way than the scorched earth capitalism my father practiced. Vivian paused. But honestly, Richard, I don't care anymore whether you approve. I spent a decade seeking your validation, trying to prove I deserved this position by your standards. And I'm done. I'm doing this with or without board support. Then you leave us no choice. Caldwell stood, and other board members followed suit. We'll be calling a vote to remove you as CEO, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building within the hour. Vivian had expected this, had known it was the likely outcome, but hearing it still hit like a physical blow, the loss of everything she'd worked for, the company she'd spent her adult life building, gone in a moment because she'd chosen humanity over profit. But then something unexpected happened. The boardroom door opened and 3 people entered, younger members of the board, executives she'd promoted over the years, people who'd been silent during the confrontation but who now stepped forward. We'd like to propose an alternative. This from Jennifer Martinez, CFO, 43 years old, someone Vivian had hired against Caldwell's objections. Rather than removing Vivian, we vote to support her new initiatives on a trial basis. 6 months to prove the education program generates positive return on investment. If it works, we continue. If it doesn't, we revisit. This isn't a negotiation, Caldwell started, but Martinez interrupted him. With respect, Richard, it is. Because if you force Vivian out, myself and several other executives will resign in protest. We'll make it very public, and the resulting PR crisis will cost shareholders far more than any education program. Another executive, David Chen from operations, nodded. The company's success under Vivian's leadership is undeniable. Removing her because she wants to try something innovative is short-sighted. We should be encouraging evolution, not punishing it. Caldwell looked around the room, clearly calculating votes, and his expression showed he'd lost the advantage. The younger board members, the executives Vivian had brought in, they outnumbered the old guard who wanted to maintain her father's legacy. Fine, Caldwell's voice was bitter. 6 months. But if this program costs more than it returns, if productivity drops, if there's any evidence this was personal favoritism rather than sound policy, we revisit removal. Agreed? It wasn't victory exactly. It was conditional survival, probation rather than support. But it was enough. Agreed, Vivian said. The meeting adjourned in tense silence. Board members filed out, some avoiding Vivian's eyes, others nodding with cautious support. Jennifer Martinez lingered at the door. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most foolish, she said quietly. Possibly both. Probably both, Vivian admitted. Thank you for speaking up. I know that was risky. You hired me when everyone else said a woman couldn't be CFO of a company this size. You've backed my decisions even when they were unpopular. I wasn't going to let them force you out for trying to do something decent. Martinez paused. Is he worth it, this Ethan Cole? Vivian considered the question. He made me realize I'd become someone I didn't want to be, and yes, that's worth fighting for. Martinez smiled slightly. Then make sure this program works, because we just bet our credibility on your judgment. After she left, Vivian stood alone in the boardroom, looking out at the city. She'd survived. Barely. Conditionally. But survived. Now she had 6 months to prove that investing in people could generate value, that Ethan Cole's success would justify the risk she'd taken. She pulled out her phone and texted him. Still employed, program approved on trial basis. Can I see you tonight? I need to explain what happened. The response came quickly. Mia has a thing at school until 7. After that, you could come here again if you want. I'll be there at 7:30. And Ethan? Thank you. For what? For being worth fighting for. That evening, Vivian arrived at Ethan's building carrying takeout from a restaurant that wasn't obscenely expensive, but was several steps above the neighborhood's usual options. She'd changed out of her battle armor into jeans and a sweater, had let her hair down, was trying to be the person she wanted to become rather than the one she'd been. Ethan opened the door, and the relief on his face was palpable. You're okay. Barely, but yes. She held up the takeout bags. I brought dinner, Thai food, because Mia mentioned she'd never tried it, and I thought maybe tonight could be an adventure. Mia appeared behind her father, eyes widening at the sight of Vivian. You came back. I did. Is that okay? It's great. Daddy said you might not be able to because of work stuff. The work stuff got complicated, but I handled it. Vivian crouched to Mia's level. How was school? Good. I made a new butterfly, and Ms. Peterson said it was the best one yet, and Leo shared his graham crackers, even though I didn't ask, so I think he likes me. Mia grabbed Vivian's hand and pulled her inside. Come see. Daddy helped me hang up the new drawing. The evening unfolded with surprising ease. They ate pad thai and spring rolls at the small table, Mia narrating her entire school day with the detailed intensity of a 6-year-old who believed every moment mattered. Vivian listened like it was the most important story she'd ever heard, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts, treating Mia's world with the respect it deserved. After dinner, while Mia watched a movie in her room, Ethan and Vivian sat on the pull-out couch and she explained everything. The board meeting, the accusations, the close call with being removed, the 6-month trial period. So this program, my education, it all depends on whether I succeed? Ethan's voice was tight with pressure. No, it depends on whether the program as a whole shows value. You're not carrying this alone. Vivian turned to face him. But I won't lie. Your success would make the strongest case. You're the pilot, the proof of concept. If you complete your degree and transition into management successfully, it validates the entire model. That's a lot of pressure. I know, and if it's too much, if you want to back out, I understand. I won't hold it against you. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, looking around his cramped apartment at the closed door of Mia's room where his daughter was safe and happy. No, I'm not backing out. You fought for this. I'm not going to waste that. But I need you to understand something. What? I'm doing this for Mia, for her future, for the possibility that her life looks different than mine has. So if at any point this starts hurting her, if the pressure or the time commitment or anything else makes her suffer, I'm done. She comes first, always. I wouldn't want it any other way. Vivian reached out tentatively, took his hand. We'll make this work. Together. The touch sent electricity through both of them, the first real physical connection beyond professional handshakes. Ethan didn't pull away, and Vivian didn't let go, and for a moment they just sat there holding hands like teenagers, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Can I ask you something personal? Ethan said quietly. Anything. Why did you really fight for this? And don't give me the business case or the public relations answer. The real reason. Vivian looked at their joined hands, at the contrast between her manicured nails and his calloused fingers, evidence of their different worlds trying to find common ground. Because you looked at me with disappointment and it broke something that I didn't know could still break. Because Mia hugged me like I was worth trusting and I realized I haven't been worth trusting in years. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human instead of just successful. She met his eyes. Because falling in love with you was the first real thing I've done since my mother died, and I didn't want to lose that by being the Ice Queen anymore. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to unsay. Ethan's eyes widened, and for a terrible moment Vivian thought she'd gone too far, revealed too much too fast. Then Ethan laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. You're in love with me? We've known each other 2 weeks, and most of that time you were either firing me or dealing with board crises. I know. It's absurd. It's irrational. It's everything my father taught me to avoid. Vivian smiled despite her fear. But I think maybe the best things are absurd and irrational and completely contrary to careful planning. I think I might be falling in love with you too, Ethan admitted. Which is terrifying because you're a billionaire and I'm barely keeping the lights on and this could end so badly for both of us. Or it could end beautifully. We won't know unless we try. They sat in the small apartment with its water-stained ceiling and thin walls, two people from impossibly different worlds who'd found each other through crisis and compassion. Neither knew exactly what came next, but for the first time in years, both were willing to find out. The next 6 months passed in a blur of transformation. Ethan enrolled in online courses to complete his degree, studying late into the night after Mia was asleep, using the childcare subsidy to ensure she had safe, enriching care while he juggled work and education. Vivian checked in regularly, not as CEO monitoring an employee, but as someone genuinely invested in his success. The media attention eventually faded as celebrity scandals replaced corporate gossip. Some outlets ran follow-up pieces when Vivian announced the education program officially, but mostly the world moved on to newer dramas. At work, Ethan transferred to a different department once the gossip became too intrusive in the kitchen. He started in data analysis, putting his business coursework to immediate use, proving that, given opportunity, he could excel far beyond dishwashing. His supervisor's reports glowed with praise. Analytical, detail-oriented, someone who understood operations from the ground up because he'd lived them. Vivian faced continued skepticism from parts of the board, but the program's early results were undeniable. 3 more employees enrolled in the education track, all showing similar promise. Retention improved, productivity increased, and the PR value of Hart Industries' revolutionary worker investment program far exceeded the actual costs. And slowly, carefully, Vivian and Ethan built something that looked increasingly like a real relationship. Dinners at his apartment became weekly traditions, Vivian arriving with ingredients she'd teach them to cook together. Mia's butterfly collection expanded to cover 2 walls, and Vivian contributed drawings of her own, remembered skills from childhood returning. Months passed. Ethan's courses progressed toward degree completion. The board's 6-month review came and went with grudging approval to continue the program. And on a Saturday afternoon in early autumn, Ethan walked across a stage in a borrowed cap and gown to receive his bachelor's degree, while Mia cheered from the audience and Vivian recorded every moment on her phone, tears streaming down her face. The management position was waiting, exactly as promised. $75,000 a year. Health insurance that actually covered things. Enough financial stability that Ethan could finally breathe without calculating every penny. They moved to a better apartment. Not extravagant, Ethan refused Vivian's offers to just buy him a place, but clean and safe with 2 real bedrooms and a kitchen where actual cooking happened. Mia got the room with the best light for her butterfly drawings, and Ethan set up a small home office where he could work without converting the couch every night. Vivian was there the day they moved in, hauling boxes alongside the professional movers she'd insisted on hiring, laughing when Mia designated her responsible for all the butterfly decorations. Standing in the empty living room of their new place, surrounded by boxes and possibility, Ethan pulled Vivian close and kissed her properly for the first time. "Thank you," he said against her lips, "for fighting for this. For us. For believing it could work." "Thank you for being worth fighting for," Vivian replied. "For showing me who I could be if I stopped being afraid." Mia's voice called from her new room. "Can we order pizza to celebrate? And can Vivian stay for movie night?" They both laughed. "What do you think?" Ethan asked. "I think I'd love to stay for movie night," Vivian said. "And pizza, and whatever comes next." A year after that terrible morning when Vivian had fired Ethan as a test, they stood together on the roof of Hart Tower at an event Vivian had designed specifically for this moment. The rooftop garden she'd commissioned was finally complete, a green space for employees with children, complete with a small playground, butterfly garden, and benches where parents could take breaks during the workday. Mia ran through the butterfly garden with other children, pointing out species, telling anyone who'd listen about migration patterns and chrysalis transformations. She wore a dress Vivian had bought her, purple, with embroidered butterflies, the kind of quality that would last for years. "She's going to outgrow that dress in 6 months," Ethan said, watching his daughter play. "Then we'll get her another one." Vivian leaned against him, comfortable in a way that had taken time to build. "And another after that. And whatever else she needs. I can afford to buy my own daughter clothes now, you know. I have a salary." "I know, but I like buying her things. She's becoming like a daughter to me, too." The words settled between them, heavy with implication. They'd been dancing around the question for months, where this relationship was heading, whether the different worlds they came from could ever truly merge. "Are we doing this?" Ethan asked quietly. "Really doing this? Building a life together? The 3 of us?" Vivian turned to face him fully. "I'd like to. If you want that too. If Mia wants that." "Mia asks when you're moving in approximately every other day. I think she wants that. And you?" Ethan looked at this woman who'd started as his worst nightmare and become his greatest hope. The ice queen who'd melted into someone warm and present and genuinely invested in his daughter's happiness. Someone who'd risked everything to prove that people mattered more than profit. "I want that too. I want you in our lives, permanently, officially. I want Mia to grow up knowing that the woman who fought for us is choosing to stay." Vivian kissed him there on the rooftop, while below them Manhattan stretched toward the horizon, a city of millions where two people had found each other despite impossible odds. When they broke apart, Mia was running toward them with a butterfly cupped in her small hands. "Look, it's a monarch! And Vivian, guess what? It landed on me, which means I made a wish and it's definitely going to come true because butterfly wishes are the most powerful kind." "What did you wish for?" Vivian asked, crouching down to examine the butterfly. Mia grinned, that beautiful, uncomplicated joy that still believed in magic. "I wish that you'd be my other mom, like officially. Is that okay?" Vivian's breath caught. She looked at Ethan, who nodded with tears in his eyes, then back at Mia, holding her butterfly like it was a sacred thing. "That's more than okay," Vivian managed, her voice thick with emotion. "That's the best wish anyone's ever made." The butterfly lifted from Mia's hands, spiraled upward into the autumn sky, carrying with it the wishes of a child who'd learned too early that the world could take everything, but who'd never stopped believing it could also give beautiful things back. Below them, in the building Vivian's father had built on ruthlessness and extraction, a new model was taking root. Education programs expanded, childcare facilities opened, policies shifted toward recognizing that the people who made the empire function were more than resources to be exploited. It wasn't perfect. The board still pushed back. Profit sometimes suffered in service of principle, and Vivian faced constant pressure to return to the old ways. But she'd learned something essential in that moment when Ethan had looked at her with disappointment, that the only legacy worth building was one you could be proud of, that success without humanity was just expensive loneliness. Months later, on a quiet evening in the apartment they now shared, Vivian helped Mia add another butterfly to her collection. This one labeled Monarch, Migration, Transformation, and the Magic of Becoming. "Did you know," Mia said seriously, "that butterflies can remember being caterpillars? Even though they basically dissolve completely, some memories survive the transformation." "I didn't know that," Vivian said, though she'd learned it from Mia weeks ago and loved hearing her explain it again. "It means," Mia continued with the profound wisdom of 7-year-olds who'd thought deeply about things, "that you don't lose who you were when you become someone new. You just add to it. You become more." Ethan, listening from the doorway where he'd been watching them, felt his heart expand with a love so complete it was almost painful. His daughter and his partner, heads bent together over butterfly drawings, building something that looked like family. That night, after Mia was asleep, Ethan and Vivian sat together on the couch that no longer converted because they had a real bedroom now, a real home, a real life built from the wreckage of what they'd been. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked. "Choosing this instead of staying the Ice Queen, making it easier with the board?" Vivian considered the question. She thought about her penthouse apartment she'd sold, about board meetings where she now faced opposition instead of deference, about the complicated reality of merging her world with Ethan's in ways that required constant negotiation and compromise. "Not for a second," she said. "That woman in the tower was successful and miserable. This version of me, the one Mia calls mom, the one you love, the one who's learning that worth isn't measured in stock prices. She's happy. And I'll take happy over successful every single time." Outside their window, the city lights glittered against the darkness, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously. But inside this small apartment that had become a home, 3 people who'd found each other against impossible odds were writing their own ending, one that included transformation and hope and the stubborn belief that love could bridge any distance if both people were willing to meet in the middle. Somewhere in the building, Mrs. Chen was probably making cabbage. Somewhere in Manhattan, Hart Tower stood as testament to what ruthlessness could build. And somewhere in a child's bedroom, butterfly drawings covered the walls, each one representing the patient accumulation of something beautiful. The caterpillar had dissolved, the chrysalis had opened, and what emerged could fly.